So I want to welcome you all. I'm Michael Curry, former president of the NAACP Boston branch. I'm on the national board of the NAACP. I chair the National Board's Advocacy and Policy Committee. I know all of you. And I had an opportunity about a week and a half ago. Someone said to me, if you had an opportunity to pull some people together, who would you pull together? And I said, black men. I think I'm like many of you in this room. I've been stressed. I've been angry. I've been concerned. I'm trying to figure out what I tell my sons, whether I tell them they need to put their hands on the dashboard or they need to talk nicely to cops when they stop them. I'm conflicted over that. And I decided that the best thing to do is to pull some brothers together that I respect, that I know have diverse perspectives on all these issues, that are in corporate, that are nonprofit leaders, that are law enforcement, that are civil rights leaders in the city. And I wanted to have this conversation with you, but I didn't just want to have it with us in the living room. The goal here today is to have this conversation with what I believe will be thousands of people online listening to this conversation that finally get to hear, as the title of this conversation is Black Men Speak, our perspectives on racism and where we go from here. So we'll touch on law enforcement and we'll have perspectives all over the board with law enforcement. But then I want to talk on economic development. We got healthcare leaders in here as we talk about health disparities and COVID-19 and how it's killing black people and could kill more of us in the spring and the fall. So we're going to have that conversation today. And I want people, as I invited you today, lean in, be comfortable. Sometimes we don't get to tell our stories in the rooms that we're in. This is a place you can share your story. So the other thing I was going to do is point your attention to these pictures up here, because I want to remind all of us why we're here. I want to remind all of us why we're here. When you see Emmett Till in 1955, and people don't remember Emmett Till, people are having an awakening right now about Emmett Till and why we compare George Floyd to Emmett Till. And I want them to know that story. I want them to know Breonna Taylor's story and the injustice when we lose any black life unnecessarily. I want to dig right in because we don't have a lot of time, and I don't want the audience to hear a lot from me. I want them to hear from you. So I want to open this up very quickly with Willie Broderick, Associate Pastor Willie Broderick at 12th Baptist Church. It is the church that Dr. King attended when he was here in Boston.
Welcome, brothers. Let us bow for prayer. O God of justice, liberation, and power, we come to you on this day as black men from varying professions, various experiences, and different walks of life, because we have been frustrated, irritated, and pushed to this conversation again about ways that we can create a movement to end racism in the city of Boston and throughout the world. God, we lift up the names of George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all of those who have senselessly lost their lives to state-sanctioned violence. And God, our prayer is that we can come into this space and have candid, true conversations so that not one more body will be taken at the hands of police. God, Family Lou Hamer said, I'm just tired of being tired. And some of us come into this space angry, some exhausted, some struggling, some pushed to the brink of questioning what's next to do. But God, we do not come into this space without hope, because we know we can move with you on our side. And so, God, my prayer is that as we come into this space, not that we all agree, but that we have a healthy dialogue that will bring us closer and closer to eradicating racism in this city and in this nation. God, I pray that you protect us as we're dealing with COVID-19, those who have already transitioned to glory, and those whose families are struggling and the exacerbation that has happened to our community. But God, we also give you praise for those who have overcome. And so God, I pray that as we engage one another, that we actually have the right spirit to do the work that we need to do, to let justice reign in this city, and to actually move towards creating a more perfect union. And so, God, we're going to lift every voice on this day, because we're going to be all right. I give you this prayer and the one who I call Jesus Christ, that radical liberator for justice. It is in his salvific name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Bodrick. I want to now welcome, before I actually bring up Steve Tompkins, I want to acknowledge the sponsors. So this was an idea a week and a half ago, and we asked some local sponsors to step up and help make this conversation possible. The first person who said yes was Orlando Watkins at the Boston Foundation, who said, Mike, I want to support this, and said, hey, I'll put some money in. The second person was Pamela Everhart from Fidelity, said, I got you. Let me know what you need. Third person was Trina Martin and BMC HealthNet Plan. We have a tremendous number of sponsors here. Manny Lopes from East Boston Health Center stepped up and said, hey, I'm going to be in the conversation, but I want to put some money into the conversation too. So it paid for one of the things that I'm most proud of right now is the black cameraman that we called and said, we want you to host and tape this conversation. So I wanted you to give a round of applause to the brothers that take this conversation. I'll mention some other sponsors later, but I just want to mention them at the outset. I want to jump right in with timing. Steve, can we go to you just for some opening remarks and a welcome?
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, brothers. Good afternoon. So basically, this is just some quick comments from the president of Roxbury Community College, Dr. Valerie Roberson. She opens up by saying who I am. I am Steve Tompkins, and in my role as chairman of the Roxbury Community College Board of Trustees, I bring greetings from our president, Dr. Valerie Roberson, and I welcome you to our college, but I also welcome you to your college. Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Roxbury Community College has always embraced this understanding, and we know that by providing students with a strong education, much more is possible for them and their families and for our entire community. We want you to know that RCC cares about you, and we are here to support your success. In fact, there are many resources available, including scholarships and financial aid, which enable you to get a degree for free. Free laptops and internet access for those who need them, especially during this pandemic. Connections to job training, paid internships, and jobs. And finally, assistance in assessing community resources such as housing, food, and childcare. These are just some of the many ways in which RCC will continue to play an important role in helping our community to achieve equal opportunities and equality. I know that we are all faced with complex issues at this time, but I believe that there is a real opportunity to change our lives and change our community for the better, our country for the better. Know that RCC will be with you and with our community as we all work towards real solutions, and I look forward to discussing what comes next. Those powerful words from the president of Roxbury Community College, Dr. Valerie Roberson.
Thank you, Steve. So I know that we have a little bit of technical issues, and those are being worked out. So people are sending me messages that they're online, and we will have the sound cleared in a second. I'm going to invite now Derek Johnson, the president of the National NAACP.
Hey, man, I'm finishing up a call with the Mississippi State Conference. 11 minutes or so.
Okay.
Less than that. I'll call you as soon as I'm ready.
We'll come back to you, Derek. So we're going to jump right in. So I want to do this first and foremost. I'm always a believer that you have to have the historical context for these conversations. You can't talk about police brutality and start with George Floyd. You got to have a conversation, a local conversation about police brutality and misconduct, a racism, and then a national conversation. So I want to start with our local historian. Joe Feaster is a longtime leader in our community, an attorney. He is the chair of the board of the Urban League. And I wanted to go to you first, Joe, because there's a series of stories about the black community's relationship with law enforcement here, and one that I've heard of since I was a young kid. I just wanted you to share, as an NAACP former president, the kind of work that you did in this space.
Michael, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this conversation. And it was interesting as you brought this together, harking back nearly 40 years ago, because that's when Levi Hart was killed by a police officer, Robert Bork. And I can still remember, I was a young man then, 30 years old and president of the Boston branch NAACP. And while there were other shootings that took place prior to that, this was the one which galvanized the community. This took place in the Back Bay. 14-year-old young man allegedly was involved with a stolen car. It caught in the Back Bay. The autopsy showed that his skull was fractured and that he had been shot. There was conflicting statements. We had an inquest by then, the late Judge Banks in the Roxbury District Court. We had an inquest, and if those who know about the inquest, you can think back to Ted Kennedy and the inquest. That was the process that was used in order to try to get the facts. So they had the inquest. The outcome of that particular case on the state level, even though with the inquest, the Suffolk DA chose not to indict. There was a federal jury, grand jury that was impaneled. They chose not to indict. The family sued civilly, and they received somewhere around $137,000 for that young 14-year-old man. There was another one in 1983, Elijah Pate. Again, a situation whereby allegedly he stole a car and hit an officer with a stolen Cadillac, as they said. And again, the situation was he was shot and killed. There was an inquest that took place. Once again, there was no charges that were filed. There was no indictments either on the city level, state level, or the federal level. That brings in contrast to what we're at least talking about the charges now as we start talking about George Floyd, we start talking about the gentleman in Atlanta and all of those, and the Brianna cases, where at least we have the charges. And again, folks need not get ahead of themselves and believe that charges will also result in convictions.
And Joe, speak to it quickly in terms of what the advocacy was. What were you asking for with the Levi Hart case and some of these others?
Well, with Levi Hart case, and interesting, I was also with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and that, as a result of that, in 1982, we began a racial violence project, and it was a series of cases that we handled in terms of police violence and the hiring. We represented Mamelo, et cetera. We were looking for justice. We were looking for the convictions, and I can tell you, having sat through, I was at the inquest. Not in the inquest, but we were outside. We were protesting at that particular point in time, and if some know the former Chief Justice Johnson, they tried to hold up his appointment as a judge because he and I and others were trying to make sure to keep the crowd somewhat calm as a result while that inquest was going on. But we were looking for justice, and clearly in that particular case, we did not get it, and from the killing of Levi Hart by Officer Robert Bork and/or the officer involved in Elijah Pate.
So I think it's important with Joe sort of laying the context that this is not new. And I lived in Minneapolis, St. Paul for a while. There was an elderly couple in 1989 in their apartment. The police did an incendiary device through the window, thought it was a drug house, really burned alive an elderly couple. And we were in the streets in Minneapolis, St. Paul in 1989 protesting and challenging how law enforcement dealt with and engaged our community. So there's a story in every city. I know some people are from other places. I want to dig in a little bit, and I know the Commissioner Gross and others have heard me say this. I don't just count bad cops as the one who put their knee on your neck or the ones who shoot you in the back. I count them also as the one who profile you, the ones who come into black and brown communities and disrespect them, the ones who won't promote and hire and treat equitably other black officers and brown officers. I consider them all bad cops, right? And I don't know if that's 5% or 75%. I don't think anyone can tell me that because no one's done that kind of data and analysis. I want to dig in on that because we all have lived experiences in the room, and I want to go to some people who have those stories. So Manny Lopes is the president and CEO of the East Boston Neighborhood Health Center. He's well known in the city, several corporate boards, Blue Cross. You're the chair of the Board of Health. We just declared racism as a public health crisis in the city of Boston. I want you to share your work, and particularly a story that you have to share around your engagement with police.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for allowing me to share my story. My story is not unique, I think, particularly for the brothers that are in the room today with us. It's about me, 21 years old, being in college, working full-time, and just starting a business. And those of us who lived in the city know how expensive it is to own a vehicle in the city. So as part of my business, I decided it was best for me just to rent cars every weekend. So I was very fortunate, again, making a decent living and have the opportunity to afford to rent cars every weekend. And in some cases, those were nice cars. And I recall a summer day, just like today, where driving down to a family's house, just picked up basketball and just getting ready to get ready to go out with all my cousins, and we got surrounded by police officers. Police officers threw us to the ground and charged me with possession of a stolen vehicle. I showed them my license, I showed them the credit card, I showed them the rental contract, but they still didn't believe me. Went to jail that weekend on a Saturday, got bailed out by Sunday morning, spent a considerable amount of time in that cell thinking, why me? Why did this happen to me? And why didn't these officers believe me? And of course, it's easy for us to come to the conclusion that that's just about being black in America. And I thought to myself as I grew older, saying, if I was a white young male driving in the suburbs of Wellesley, would this have happened to me? Would they have believed me? So when we think about Black Lives Matter, it goes beyond, well, we know it's about life and death, but we also know it's about that belief. It's about that trust. It's about health. It's about economics. It's a whole bunch of factors when we talk about Black Lives Matter. And I experienced that again 30 years ago in that jail cell, just thinking about what my life really meant to these
And that
officers.
wasn't your only interaction with police, right?
Unfortunately, that wasn't. That was the one that I wanted to share today.
Yeah.
But before that, I had many interactions. And in fact, I'll share publicly that I was arrested 3 times for something that I never did.
But I want to go now, as we just heard from Manny Lopes, very respected public health leader, business leader, nonprofit leader in the city, tell his personal story. A good friend of mine, Amari Jeffries, another brother who's a nonprofit leader in the community, affiliate with UMass, the UMass system, also has a personal story. I'd like you to share yours as well, Amari. Can we get a mic to Amari? Go ahead.
So refreshing to see everyone here today. And like Manny, my story is not unique. And I'll start off by saying that I've been arrested about 3 times as well. But the story I'll share is one night that happened to me when I was with my soon-to-be wife. If some of you remember, there was a spot near North Station called the Cosmopolitan. And so that was a spot that a lot of us used to go.
Yeah.
And so one night we went out there and had a few drinks, and she was paying. So it made it even a better night for me. So I was drinking for free, and she was driving, and so that was double bonus. And so we were leaving the establishment. She had forgotten her credit card with the bartender, and she knew the bartender, and we both did. And she said, "You know what? I'll come back and get it later." And I said, "No, you know what? We're just right down the street. We're 2 buildings away. We could circle back. You run in because it's going to be easier for you to get in. I'll wait in the car. You go get your credit card." And so I'm in the passenger side. I'm not driving, and 2 officers pull up and pull behind me and shine the spotlight on us. One of them gets out of the car and bangs on the window and yells through the window, "Didn't you see? I told you to move." And I said, "Well, I saw you shine the light on me. I wasn't sure." But the driver is inside the establishment getting her credit card. I'm the designated passenger for the night. I had a few drinks because I wanted to tell him that I was in no condition to drive. They'll be out in a few minutes. And if you remember Canal Street, it is 4 cars wide. And so cars in both directions can go back and forth because of the way the street is designed. So we were not obstructing traffic. He says to me, "I need you to get out of the car because I need to search the car for drugs." So I said, "Okay." So I get out of the car to search the car for drugs. Not sure if that's what I'm able to do, if that's what he's able to do, but I let him do it. Stand to the side, and he said, "Well, now I'm going to tow the car." And so I said, "Oh man, maybe I should have just drove." So I said, if you're going to tow the car, would it be all right for me to get my wallet, which is in the center console? Because I figured if I sat in the car and I got my lady's car towed, I'm probably going to have to pay for it to get out of tow. So let me get my wallet. So I entered through the passenger side because I did not want to get arrested or seem like I'm going to drive the car away. Get into the car to get my license. He arrests me for failure to obey the lawful order of an officer and disorderly conduct. And through the grace of God, fortunately, mentors and sponsors were able to post my bail and help me pay for the lawyers. I don't have a record. And that's not the case with many folks, to be able to afford an attorney and to spend so much time out of work paying for and going to court to try to argue a case. And I think the part for me that was heartbreaking was that both of the officers were black. And I think the context for me is law enforcement unintentionally becomes the law enforcement arm of white supremacy. And we in the system ends up getting great officers who go in to support their community, tied into a system that promotes that kind of action towards each other. Because I explained what was going to happen, I explained I was not driving, I explained I had something to drink, I explained the driver was coming out, we were not obstructing traffic, I said she would be 5 minutes, she was 5 minutes, and so I had to come out, and my wife had to see me in cuffs in the back seat. And so, through the grace of God, that is behind me. That was 20 years ago, but that is not the case for many folks. And I think, like Manny, that wasn't my first experience, and it certainly wasn't my last. And and it's trying to follow the rules of the talk around. Yes, officer, I am not driving. This is my condition. You can search my car, sure. By the way, and I'm glad that we could have this conversation and not only talk about police, but really talk about how we as black men dismantle white supremacy.
Thank you, Amari. I'm going to open it up for a second before I get some more reaction to those stories. I want to welcome to the conversation, calling in remotely, Derek Johnson, who's the president and CEO of the National NAACP. I would have loved if he could be here, of course, but travel is limited. But Derek wanted to call in and greet you. And Derek, we just had a conversation that really started out with former NAACP President Joe Feaster telling the story really of about 40 years ago of a case, Levi Hart, that was murdered by the police. And he worked on it on behalf of the NAACP. And then we've had two brothers share their personal stories of their interactions with the police. So I just want to give you the context and then open it up for you to provide some remarks.
Good. Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. When Michael told me about this gathering, I thought this was great, and it really is a testimony of his leadership. In fact, we at NAACP, we are benefiting and celebrating some of his vision nationally. He and Coach Wiley have put together a program called Next Gen. And with Next Gen, we are now beginning to see the benefit of the work they put together. Because when you look at what took place in Minneapolis, and the young branch president there, a 28-year-old young woman by the name of Leslie Redmond, who's a lawyer, who's been in the street with all of the youth activists who look to her as a mentor and a counterpart, because she's at an age where she's not too old, but at a stage where she's still engaged with young people. But her professional background allowed her to navigate the policy discussion. So she's in ongoing conversation with the police chief, who's actually a really good brother, and the mayor to navigate that. Or when you look at Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery, and how everything evolved there. Much of that evolved as a result of a 26-year-old state president for Georgia, who Major Woodall was a part of Next Gen, just like Leslie. And so rebuilding and replenishing our leadership across the nation through this Next Gen program is really a part of some of the hard work that Michael Curry has done from his perch in Boston, but really with a national eye on how we maintain the voice on the ground. So this is a good moment. The other thing that I found interesting when Mike mentioned it to me, because he know I'm an avid hunter, he said, with the current environment, there is a growing number of friends throughout Boston and Massachusetts who are now reconsidering their position on guns and going to getting permits with guns. And, and I always, when we have a conversation talking about whether or not I was sitting in a deer stand if I shot a deer, it is unfortunate that we are entering in that stage, in that phase of our own community and personal security. It's a stage and phase that has really accelerated over the last 3.5 years, and it's something that we must address nationally. And addressing it oftentimes is born in the public policy or the political atmosphere that exists. And so we are sitting in the midst of this juncture of three things intersecting. The first thing is the political climate and what can we do about it. The political climate right now is ripe for us to put forth and double down our efforts for November. And our efforts in November is both about the national and federal elections, but also about the local elections, because whether it's Louisville, Kentucky, Georgia, Minneapolis, or Amy Cooper, the white woman who committed a racial hate crime against a brother who was simply bird watching, the decision on how that is managed comes from district attorney offices. And in most jurisdictions around the country, district attorneys are elected. And so for the NAACP, we're beginning to drill down and figure out where do we have opportunity to challenge district attorneys who see themselves more aligned with police officers who are terrorizing our communities, as opposed responsible for holding police officers accountable for the terror they're presenting to us. It is also a moment of intersection of culture. When you look at the protesters across the country, you see a clear picture of America. It's black, it's white, it's young, old, male, female, and that is something that's unique, something that we have not seen at this level before in reaction to an event. And then thirdly, it's almost as if corporate America woke up 3 weeks ago and realized that racism actually exists. It's that aha moment. And it was shocking to me when I was scheduling meetings for yesterday, how many corporate leaders said, well, we can't do it Friday because we have let employees off for the Juneteenth holiday, which I found shocking. I found it shocking because the concept of Juneteenth for many years was a regional celebration, primarily in Texas and in Oklahoma, because it was in those areas that for 2 years, Africans in America didn't know they had been freed from slavery, so they worked 2 additional years under a system that they were free from. And so when you look at that corporate interest, and it's fleeting, we don't know how long it's going to be, cultural impact along with political opportunity, we are in the midst of something that's unique if we are able to leverage it. And so conversations like this, where brothers are looking at their responsibility, our collective opportunities on how we move the needle forward, is really crucial. So thank you, Michael, for pulling this together. These are conversations that I am seeing across the country. It is not as unique as this. I think this is an important one because we're having bigger conversations with everybody, but there's a certain level of responsibility that we must, as black men, we need to take some responsibility for. We got to protect our women. Those murderers in Louisville, Kentucky have not even been charged unless brought to justice, who killed Breonna Taylor, who was sleeping in her bed. And so it's an incumbent upon us to stand up even stronger with all of our agencies to ensure that we not only protect ourselves, but to protect our family and the communities that we represent. So thank you, Michael, for that.
Derek, I appreciate you calling in. Thank you very much, Derek.
All right. Thank you.
So we're going to get back in the conversation, but I wanted to, before we go to Rasan, have this conversation and recognize Ayanna Polk. Raise your hand, Ayanna. Ayanna's here. She's one of the graduates of Next Gen. Derek mentioned this, and some of us have had this conversation that we need to train the next generation of civil rights leaders so that there are a generation of shaguns growing up that understand policy, understand how to deal with the media, understand how to write legislation. 3 years ago, the NAACP launched a program. We have about 300 graduates and another 100 going through training right now. The president of Minneapolis is a graduate of that program. The president of the Georgia State Conference is a graduate of the program. Ayanna was in the inaugural class of the Next Gen program. So that's the kind of work. But I just wanted to reference that. Rasan, I want to go to you quickly because we have some personal stories, and I want to hear from others, even law enforcement. This is an inflection point, right? As Derek said, there's more consciousness about racism. I never thought I'd see a time in my lifetime where so many white folks are talking about white supremacy or reparations, right? For all the financial economic development. Bob Johnson talking about reparations. What does this mean as you hear personal stories like that of Manny and Amari and some others will hear? You've been doing civil rights work for a long time, brother. You've been on the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and now you need to lead the racial justice work of the ACLU. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you, Michael. I think when we see the murder of George Floyd, it strikes the same chords as the murder of Eric Garner. When we hear about the murder of Breonna Taylor, it is resonant with the murder of Tatiana Jefferson. When we think about the vigilantism behind the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, it's just like the vigilantism behind the murder of Trayvon Martin and Emmett Till. There is this uninterrupted thread that runs through this nation's history from slavery, the post-Reconstruction era, and Jim Crow. The lynching that happened is a form of social control. And when you think about law enforcement, and I appreciate Brother Amari's point, that law enforcement, particularly as it relates to communities of color, but black communities especially, are a tool and a function of white supremacy, of maintaining that structural order in society that establishes white people as the superior race, which was necessary to justify the institution of slavery. And so from slavery, post-Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era, and Jim wasn't alone. He had an uncle named Sam. There were aspects of the federal government that continued to perpetuate this harm, whether it was the Johnson administration's war on poverty and then pivoting to the war against crime in urban communities in the mid-60s. And one of the things that was consistent throughout all of those uprisings in the 60s were there were these communities with high concentrations of black people, high concentrations of poverty, high concentrations of low educational attainment and economic opportunity, and the precipitating event in each of those uprisings was police brutality against black people. And that hasn't changed since the 60s. Some of us in here remember it from the 60s, some of us remember it from the Rodney King incident, some of us remember it from these more recent killings. And so it's incumbent upon us to really push in this moment, because the conversation around police reforms isn't going to address the underlying issue within policing. It's a structural issue. It's how policing is constructed from the slave patrols and to protect property in northern municipalities from a surge of an influx of immigrants. The problem with policing is not a few bad apples, because as the saying goes, a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch. I have an apple tree that grows next to my house and it's diseased. And so every apple that comes off of that tree falls to the ground because it's diseased. And so it's not just a few bad apples, it is the tree from the branch all the way through the roots. And that's what needs to be addressed and to be changed. So these brothers' stories aren't different than any of these other stories. Fortunately, they were able to live through them, but there's also other Boston stories like Terrence Coleman and Burrell Ramsey White that need to be lifted up too, because Boston is no different than this long history in this country.
So I want to go, and I think, again, it's a conversation. So we're going to have a conversation that we won't all agree on some of this, but I wanted to go to law enforcement next. So we have three huge law enforcement leaders here in the front, and I want to go to one, Commissioner Gross, because I think it's a challenge when you're black and blue, right? As we heard in Amari's case, his arrest and the injustice, and that was by 2 black officers.
Right.
And then you hear Rasan talk about systems that have been built off of white supremacy. How do you take all that in the position you have? Because you represent a majority white male police department.
Right.
You have minority law enforcement officers. You're being pushed on really systemic changes, disrupting how we do policing in this country. So I'd love to hear from you, and then I'd love to hear from Chief Green as well.
First off, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Juneteenth. Happy Father's Day. It is tough. I have to talk about a personal story, too. I came here in 1975 when it was racially tumultuous. The police department had already been sued in 1970 by black and brown officers because they wouldn't hire them, wouldn't promote. In 1974, the lawsuit came through to fruition. Thus, we had a consent decree. And that was from MAP, the Massachusetts Association of Afro-American Police, which was changed the moniker to MAMLEO in 1983. With that being said, but the history that was taught to me is know your history, know your self-worth. I still wanted to be a police officer. We knew about Levi Hart. That was talked about in the neighborhood. So I'm going to go forward. In 1983, I came on as a Boston police cadet. The questions and the interviews, how come you weren't arrested? You're from Esmond Street. Why do you want this? Why do you people want that? Don't everyone ever misconstrue because I put on a blue uniform that I didn't experience racism. It was known as the most racist city with the most racist police department. Myself, and then later on, Sergeant Crispin, we had to navigate through a department that was heavy with nepotism, favoritism, politics, and racism. And you've heard me say it a million times. If you want change, be the change. I would not let a racist deter me from my right to do what I wanted. What I found was not only the deaths here in Boston, but across the nation, there definitely needed to be a change. Everybody's right. You needed a change. I lived through it. Some of the shootings in Boston, very controversial. I lived through it. Mass incarceration of the latter 80s and 90s, I lived through it. I was a poor black kid. I know no one was born with a gun or drugs in their hands, but I know this. I was not gonna let myself or anyone else be pushed around because of racism. So I fought hard. And some of the things that I was able to do as a black man and educate others, even though they were racist or ignorant, about communities of color and about all-inclusive history. Then we go to Charles Stewart. Ridiculous. As a group of black officers sat in the Dorchester station and says, nah, that's not right. And other people were over-exuberant to make this great pinch. And that turned out wrong. And then the St. Clair's Commission, when it stated that black police officers were punished twice as harshly as white police officers for the same types of offenses. Don't think I sat there silent. I was taking notes. I was being trained. My top mentor was a Tuskegee Airman that didn't take crap from anyone, Willis T. Saunders, that said that people don't work for you, they work with you, and I live by it. But I'll wrap it up. We lived through that, and then we started getting opportunities because of forward-thinking leaders. And then we found the importance of community policing, where everybody has to come out of their individual silos and work together. Our mission statement changed from serve and protect to working in partnership with the people in the community to problem solve together to create a better quality of life. So the Boston Police Department transitioned from people that came straight from the Vietnam War, straight through forced busing, affirmative action, to young cats like me that I met Eddie Crispin in Dorchester Court and like, come on, we need you, and he joined the force. We definitely experienced systematic racism in our very system. And one of the things that you need to do, you have to change the culture, and it's not easy. One of the things that we did as I came along aboard the command staff almost 13 years ago, we started teaching through people that would actually come into our academy and share lived experiences. You cannot get everything from a book and a lesson plan. You need to bring people in. You need to bring in as well the groups as NAACP, ACLU, I know you don't believe me, Urban League, mothers that have lost their children to senseless violence, formerly incarcerated, and others. With that being said, when we got our shot, now I'm the first African-American chief.
So I want to come back to you, Commissioner, because there's a lot I want to go back to you on where we are now. You talked about a lot of that history.
That's exactly what I was going to do.
Let me come back to you with that, but I want to get Chief Green. There's an interesting moment we're at for any of us who do civil rights work all the time, which is we now can make phone calls to folks who look like us to have conversations. I've never seen that, right? You're seeing it in Atlanta, you're seeing it all over the country, where even as Derek talked about, you can make a phone call to your police commissioner who's black or the superintendent of the school system who's black. Doesn't mean you always get movement or that you get what you want or need, but there's a conversation. And quite frankly, as Joe will tell you, and the many other presidents like Ken Guscott and Lenny Alkins, Charlotte Nelson, they wouldn't even take your call. Right? They didn't have to talk to you unless you was mild like Joe was. Then they had to talk to you.
That's how we started. Someone wouldn't talk to you, and I.
But I say that to say I want to go to Chief Green, because as soon as Chief Green became chief, he reached out to me with the NAACP and said, I want to talk. I want to have a conversation about how we're doing it, what we do. Chief, what's your perspective of this moment we're in? You've watched the murders on television. We needed to hear our black officers respond to George Floyd. Right? That 8 minutes and 46 seconds shocked us. Like if you took the opportunity that day of the funeral to sit still for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, as I stood there and I took that 8 minutes and 46 seconds, by 3 minutes I said, that's murder. There's nobody that can deny that's murder. By 6 minutes I said, you'd have to be straight, cold-hearted racist to not say that's murder. What was the reaction of our black law enforcement as you see that? Laquan McDonald, Eric Garner, where are you at and what do you see?
Yeah, so when I watched, just like everybody else, when I watched the murder of George Floyd, I mean, I was pissed off like everybody else was. I was shocked. Before anything else, I'm a black man, you know, before any titles, before any positions that I've held. And when I watched, and what that murder showed me was that white police officer had no value in the virtue in the virtue of a black life, in the sanctity of a black life. As a law enforcement officer, as I watched it, I couldn't believe. I was astonished at his coldness, his callousness, like he had no care in the world. As the guy was dying underneath him, you know. And then I became engulfed in fear, because at that moment too, I thought about, and I'm going to show my age a little bit, that George Floyd could have been one of my 3 sons. You know, and it pissed me off. And I am, I'm just shocked that in 2020, after all we've been through, with the murder of Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Laquan McDonald, and others, are still happening at the hands of white police officers that look like, that wear a uniform like I wear, that have taken the same vows in oath of office and oath of honor, you know, that I have, and this is still going on. I'm really sick to my stomach of this, that unarmed black men, women, and sometimes children are still being murdered.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to take Sheriff Tompkins, and then I want you to respond to law enforcement. I want you to respond to what you heard. So just give me a signal if you want to chime in. But Sheriff Tompkins, you have the distinction of being our Suffolk County Sheriff, one of the highest ranking elected officials in this area. You don't do the policing side, but you get them when they're arrested and they're sent to Suffolk County Jail. But you weighed in on all these topics. How are you seeing this moment we're in, and what's your feeling as a black man, as a law enforcement officer, if you could share that?
Let me start by saying this, Michael, in answer to that question. And when you talk about the repeated killings of folk of color, men and women, when Africans were stripped from their country and brought to the shores of this country, they didn't arrive here as immigrants looking to improve the station in life. They didn't arrive as indentured servants, having the ability to buy their way out of servitude. They arrived as chattel. They arrived as property of others. And when you have that kind of mindset, that this is my property, I can do whatever I want to this individual because he or she belongs to me. And that's not the case, but that's the reality for so many people, not just across this country, but across this globe. And until we can change that dynamic, and as the commissioner mentioned, when you talk about changing a culture, it's very hard to do. I often talk about the American dream, that ideal that says every citizen should have the opportunity to achieve success and prosperity through hard work and determination. Well, that hasn't been afforded to black and brown, the underserved and the overlooked, you see. And so when people say to me, the criminal justice system in its entirety, not just policing, needs to be fixed, I counter by saying the criminal justice system was built to be punitive. It wasn't like it's broken now. It was built to be punitive and have outrageous punishments upon people that other people thought, this is my property. I can do what I want to this individual. And so until we can change that dynamic, Michael, until we can really change that dynamic, this will continue to go on. Now we're at not only just a crisis moment, but we're at a place where if change is going to happen, it's going to happen now. And let me close by saying this. So we had President Obama, and we had that kumbaya moment. And people thought, oh man, the country's changing. Black man is the president. And it was great. Then we had Donald Trump come in. And Donald Trump's administration and Donald Trump himself is showing us that there's much more work to be done. We are nowhere near the end of this cultural change. And if that wasn't enough, then we have a pandemic that says if you fools won't stop yourselves to have some real concerted conversation about what needs to get changed, then Mother Nature's going to stop your foolish asses and give you an opportunity to talk about, to understand just how unequal it is for folk of color. And then you have the killing of George Floyd. You have a televised murder. So it is now at this time, like no other time, that if change is going to happen, Michael, it's got to happen now.
I need to go to Willie Broderick next. Willie worked in the Attorney General's office for a while. He's in the tradition of reverends that are activists that I follow in the NAACP. Willie, what's your reaction to sort of where law enforcement is thinking about this and Rasan's comments? And it's talking.
I've been thinking, I've been very appreciative of this conversation. I've been very appreciative of this conversation in context. We've been blessed because we have three brothers that are willing to come to the table, first and foremost, and have this tough conversation. I've walked in peace walks at 12 Baptist Church with each and every one of them.
Pick your mic up, not Willie is gone.
I've been in peace walks in this conversation with all of those brothers who come to walk the community and do this work with us. But there's something problematic about the way we do policing. And I think we've created a binary narrative that actually isn't true. We've created blue lives against black lives. And that is not even a reality because even black lives that wear blue get harassed, get accosted, get beat, get taken advantage of, get arrested by their own fellow ranks. And so I'm praying that we can push towards a place I'm praying that we can push towards a place where we can actually tear down these false notions of reality as if the issues that are happening in the streets aren't happening to black officers as well. And I want us to get to a place of accountability to say, well, if we do have black officers that are saying, I'm a black man first, then why aren't we pushing harder to ask really tough questions around decertification of officers that just get bumped around every other year? And they move from one city to another city and another city, whether they're white, black, or brown, and they continue to terrorize our communities. And so I think one of the things that we have to actually think critically about and what we've heard today is that it doesn't matter whether you're in the C-suite or you're in Main Street. You can be taken advantage of, you can be broken, you can be accosted, you can be harassed by the police officers. And we all have these stories. I can speak of one personally where I had a gun drawn on me by a police officer. And I was with my frat brothers, and we were with our pro fights, and he was just going to see a house that he was about to buy. Someone called the police on us because I was driving his car. And for 45 minutes, we sat on the street with our hands behind our backs as people were driving by as college students at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And if I did not listen to my friend scream at me and say, Willie, put your hands on the steering wheel, I'm thinking it's a routine stop. I could have ended up being a hashtag. And so when you invoke the names of those like the Emmett Tills of the world and you invoke a George Floyd, I recognize that it could have been me, could have been my brothers, could have been my father, could have been any of these brothers in this room. And we have to get to a place where we have a real honest conversation around the culture of policing in this country. it's not just a black officer here or a white officer there. There's a problematic, toxic culture, and it's not just in our policing. Policing is a spotlight, but it happens in every aspect of our society, in our healthcare, in our education, in government. I mean, we're still trying to get more black officers in there because there are people who don't want that to happen. We need to talk about depowering police unions and actually having real conversations to the reasons why we haven't been able to move forward in our society. And so the cries to defund is to say, look, we need to put money in places where it needs to go. It needs to go into de-escalation. It needs to go into prevention. It needs to go into making sure that the people that are affected most, the people who have encounters the most, that those stories are legitimized and that we actually have real conversational growth. And so I push at each and every one of you brothers, because I love you, to say we got to do something different. Because what we're doing right now is not happening, not good for Boston, but it's also not good for the nation. And if we're not willing to say to that blue wall of silence that enough is enough, we as a black community, we as black officers, we are coming together. We're not going to take it anymore. We want to make sure that anybody that does not uphold our values does not work in our communities and is not working anywhere else in this country.
Thank you, Willie. Before I go to you, Minister Muhammad, I want to start with Kevin, and then I'm going to actually come back to you in the DA's office, Ricky. Kevin Williams had an experience which Commissioner Gross knows well. About a year and a half ago, I got a call from his mother who said, they just arrested my son for murder. And Mike, I need your help because I know my son didn't do it. And I'm going to tell you one of the most difficult things to do when you're in the NAACP, and Rasan would attest to this from his days even with Lawyers Committee, and Joe Feaster, is that everybody will call you. They won't give to the NAACP. They don't believe in the NAACP, but let them get arrested. Then they call the NAACP or the Urban League, Joe and William Watkins. So I got this call, and of course, this is family, this is my nephew. And his mom said to me, I need you to get involved. He didn't do it. Now, problem in the NAACP is when people call you and say, my son didn't do it, you don't know. Like, you don't know the circumstances. You don't have the evidence. You don't have access to the video. You don't know the person. This was my nephew. So I knew him. I believed him. I believed his mother. So I wanted to go to Kevin because Kevin was found out not to have been anywhere near the scene and not even involved in the scene. And I want to deal with this issue of whether you got to be perfect to get justice, because that's a problem. And as people can look around and see DJ Henry, that people don't even know his story, or Trayvon Martin or Tamir Rice that was 12, and then they still try to look at whether you got in trouble in school or you smoked weed or you did something as an excuse. If you ever watched the video, the documentary on James Byrd in Texas, who they dragged behind a truck, they interviewed a group of white residents around the table. They said, well, he wasn't a good guy anyway. So he deserved to be dragged behind a truck and his head decapitated by some townsfolk. So I just want to get another personal story in, Kevin. And I know this is tough because, Kevin, you're probably one of the youngest, if not the youngest person in this room. And you're still trying to sort through what happened to you. But as much as you can, share your story, man.
So it was like, October 2018. My mother was about to move the next day, but I hate staying in the house. So I'm like, Mom, I'm gonna go down the street to a friend's house. She's like, no, we're moving in the morning, 8 a.m., stay home. The walk's a minute walk. So like literally, I'm walking, I get to where I'm supposed to be, and I hear like like somebody just pulled up on me. So I'm like, okay. I turn around, it's like a decked out, all black truck. Two Fed people cop out. Excuse me, sir, where you going? Like I'm at my destination. They're like, no, you're not, you fit a description. I'm like, what description? There was a shooting up the street. I'm like, it's Boston, Mass, there's always shootings. The black officer grabbed me up, put me down, then a white dude started going, going crazy, but I'm tell him like, yo, I just came from my house. Like literally, my mom just seen me 2 minutes ago. Have the neighbors call my mom. She runs down the street, she's making a scene, but they're not like literally hearing us at all. Like they're telling me, no, you fit the description, light skin. They're telling me I'm chubby, I'm skinny as hell, you feel me? Like, they're telling me all this, so supposedly a witness pulls up in a police car. We can't see the witness. Nobody hops out. We can't even hear the radio. So they have me stand on the street. They don't bring me nowhere. They put a light on me, middle of the street. Witness says it's him. That's him. He did it. They bring me down to C11. No, to homicide. They tell me I'm homicide. Oh, give me a statement. You can go home. I told them, call my mother or my lawyer. They call me an asshole. Bring me right down. Take me out of all my clothes. Bring me to C11 and tell me it's attempt murder, robbery. 3 hours later, I'm back out, felony murder. You don't got a bail, you're not going nowhere. Like, hold on. Call my mother, what's going on? 4 days later, we at court, no bail at Nashua Street. If I ain't have you and I have my mother, I'll still probably be in Nashua right now, waiting for trial. So.
And Kev, I want to stop you there, and I want you to finish your story. But there's something interesting about Kevin's story. And by the way, his mother's a beast, right? If you needed a mother to defend you, she's a beast. Like really, like was on the phone with everybody. Was like, no, she was gonna pull a Johnny Cochran team to help her son. So I wanted to tell something about your story because, and we should get this from law enforcement. The way the story played out is you was guilty.
Yeah.
The way the news read that next day is you did it. We got the guy who did it. They actually showed you in court. Standing there. So if you were a person sitting in your living room and you knew this Cape Verdean brother got killed on Dorchester Avenue, you're like, good, they finally got him.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with some of this stuff and it goes back to the Charles Stewart murder case, right? If people don't know that history, you need to look that up. About Charles Stewart playing like Amy Cooper did on racial stereotypes and shot his pregnant wife and knew that all he had to say was a black man with a vague description. And it would lead to a whole chain of events. So Kev, you were guilty. But I want you to just tell one more piece of your story about now you're in gladiator school, I call it.
Oh,
right? You're a good dude, right? You're now sitting in with Steve in Suffolk County Jail. And some people have been to jail, but I call it gladiator school because when you're there, you got to get down with somebody. Right? You got to be cool. Somebody got to get your back. Kev, talk about what the experience was and then how you're dealing with what happened to you.
It just made me a man. Like, it was just different. Like, I'm a mama's boy, you feel me? Like, my mom, so if I mess up, she's gonna, oh, you gotta get this, you gotta do this, but she's strict. Jail, it's like, you're on your own, it's jail. Like, I don't know how to really explain it. It was a whole new world for me. Like, I woke up to a lot of things. There's racism in jail too. Like, they'll let you out, like a white guy let you out to get some water when you're not supposed to come out. Black dudes, we getting locked in 10, 20 minutes early. We can't call home. It's jail. Jail is completely different from the real world, but it isn't, because it's like, I don't know how to explain it really, but it's hell, you know? So.
Hold it thought. I'm gonna come back to you, Steve. I want to just go, and I'm gonna come to you, Minister Muhammad, in a second. I want to go to Darryl, because this is the right place to go, since we're talking about jail. Darryl Jones would serve 32 years in prison. So we always have these conversations about people who get, like Kevin, get charged, get sentenced, and there's a whole long history, Rasan, of black men sitting in prison with very shaky evidence that a white man would have got free. Share your story, Mr. Jones, about what you experienced, because that's 32 years. I mean, Kev was in for 3 weeks?
Yeah, like 4 weeks, a month.
Like 4 weeks? His mother got the accurate time. What was your experience? You got your sentence vacated. I know you still got some residual stuff going on with your case, but talk about what that experience was for you.
Well, I don't have any residuals other than them compensating me. I was exonerated. I'm on the national exoneration, right? So that's the bottom line. But I think more than talking about my case, because I came here for real dialogue, and talking about my case is something you can Google, look up. I lived that hardship. I can relate when he talks about prison. And that's one of the things that I really want to get across to the sheriff, to the commissioner, to my brothers, is that when you're in prison, we are missing something right now that is valuable. Other than me doing 32 years, I was 18 years old. I had no conviction like him, never been arrested for any of that type of stuff. This is actually a touching moment because I knew Levi, I knew Eliza Pate. Eliza Pate lived at the house next to me. So as a kid, I'm already traumatized because these are people that I know already getting hit up. And then to see my life go that way was kind of, peculiar. But one of the things we miss is that we're having a conversation now, but in that 32 years while I was in prison, I don't hear these conversations because we don't have an action plan. And part of that action plan has to be things like this airing in the prison. Those are the brothers you got to be concerned about. We talk about what the community's doing and they're coming back home and let's rearrest them, but you're not given a platform where I can hear you. Yeah. So when I was in prison, the only thing that we have to watch was Bounce TV, right? So that's the black channel. I am amazed to come home 32 years later, and I tried to start a thing called Do Your Homework Media, because I'm saying we should do the homework after the media says something. We should have our own broadcast to be able to follow up on that media. You understand that? Mm-hmm. So we have a view about whatever they're putting out. And we become, and this is no offense, but it's just like calling the police. We are mastering becoming aftermath specialists. We deal with things after the fact. When are we going to get ahead of something, right? And we have to open that platform. You know, I sat in prison, Minister Randy, Pastor Dickerson. You know, when you're the other black men in this community, sadly, I didn't get to know you because Mike Curry, when he was in that NAACP, came to visit me in prison. It grew. I grew with these brothers. I worked with the minister because I had that involvement. And when I was in prison, I was going against the union, you know, trying to build programs. I built like at least 12 programs in that prison system, and I was going against a union, right? Be mindful that what is happening out here is worse than there. I'll give you an instance. One day I got into it with the cops, and it was right when Trump got elected. And they had me in segregation, and it was a group of cops. And I was trying to say, you just chained me up, you just gassed me, you did all this stuff to me. And all they kept yelling at my door was Trump, Trump, Trump. And the reason they were doing that because they were saying, we got who we want in place now, we're gonna do what we want to do with you. Be mindful that although we're out here doing this, those guards that are in that prison system, they are taking it out on us right now because they can do that. No one is watching over them. No one is on them. So we're out here talking about defund the police, but they have us so closed in. They take it out on us. So everything you see going out, that white guard comes at us. I had years of them on my back. And we are not doing anything about that. So we can't be blaming sisters and brothers coming home and saying it's their fault and these kids are doing that. We don't got a kids problem. We got a damn adults problem. You understand? We were supposed to lead the way. You know, you understand what I'm saying, Mike? And so I'm just trying to encourage everybody to sponsor a brother, meet a brother, and if you're ahead of something, let's demand to that DOC, let's ask the commissioner of police, let's ask the sheriff, let's demand that we start airing inside the prison because we need to be talking to them, and let's demand that they have a broadcast where they can see what the community expects, what we want change, who we expect you to be, who will help you, because honestly, bro, one of my disappointments were, and I got over 1,500 now signatures from men in prison, Ricky McGee being one. They let it, signatures signed saying, we don't want nobody representing us but you right now. Nobody's saying what they need to be saying. They won't say it, right? I'm saying that when I came home, I couldn't go to a black man out here and get a job. I didn't get no job. I just went that whole time without no job. And although the mayor hired me, I couldn't go to one black organization out here and say I need a job. And that contract runs out this month. Of course, I look at it and say, when I was convicted, it's Commonwealth versus Darrell Jones. It's Commonwealth. That means I was convicted in my own Obama's name and your names. And when I come out here, you can't take it like he's too vocal, he's too this. Let me be me, you be you, and we stay in our lanes. Even in the Olympics, if you run, you can be right on that line at the end. If you step in the other person's lane, you're out. Let our experiences come together so we can talk to our people. Each one of us have somebody we can talk to. I have the people I can talk to. We can unite and do that. And if we're not doing that, then we're just going to keep being aftermath specialists and wait for somebody else to die.
I'm going to come back to you. I know I got to get you in the DA's office, but I want to go to Brother Randy Muhammad, Minister Randy Muhammad. I want to go to you for a few things, but I want you, Pastor Dickerson here yet? Where's he at? I'm going to tell you the reason I ended up visiting him in jail, because I ended up going on a series of visits to jail and talks in jail with Supreme Richardson, who's here in the back, who said, Mike, it's not just about the folks who come into the office. Can you bring the conversation to them? And I want to give credit to the two brothers in the back, but I want to go to Minister Muhammad first about what we're seeing in this moment of law enforcement. And what he talked to was it's not just about the policing on the street, it's the probation system, it's parole, it's Department of Corrections, and we check out when they go in. We don't pay attention, as the two of you know. And then we get the calls saying, hey, he doesn't have his medication. They won't let him have his medication. He just got beat up. He can't see his family. They put him in isolation. He's been in isolation way too long. Talk about what you've seen and the work that you're doing with the Nation of Islam.
For having me. It's an honor to be here with all of you to speak. This is some serious times that we're living in. I'm Minister Randy Muhammad of Muhammad Mosque number 11, the local representative of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I just want to start off to say that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan will be having a national address where he will be addressing a lot of our concerns regarding what we're seeing on July the 4th, and that's going to be televised through NOI.org. What we're seeing right now with the uprisings and the continued murder of black people at the hand of law enforcement is nothing new, right? And one of the few things that I want to pick up on, many people are recognizing that part of the problem and that the problem today that we're recognizing is structural racism, right? The problem is racism, white supremacy. And a lot of people are acknowledging that, almost to the point where it's becoming cliche, where people are out talking about structural racism and deconstructing the systems. And it does have to happen. I'm here to push the envelope a little bit, and I want to give you something to really think about, right? Because we have been going through this ever since we have been here. We have experienced, the worst treatment in human history, right? And so to look at what happened to our brother George Floyd and the nonchalant way that police officer just sat there and slowly murdered him while he is being recorded in broad daylight, that goes to show how little respect this society has had for black people and black men in particular. So, with that being said, one of the things that I don't see being discussed, and I want to throw this out there on behalf of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, is that we as a people, black people, must consider separation. Because when you start talking about structural racism, you got to understand that racism is in every aspect of our society. We're talking about you have to change the curriculum in the educational system, which means you would have to now begin to tear down all of those that are children and that we have been taught are heroes, like Columbus and all of the presidents, right? That we see now all these Confederate statues that are coming down, right? So we have to go to that, and because racism is rooted right in to the fabric of this society. How far are we going to go as a society to end structural racism? Because it's not just in the educational system, it's in the religious system, it's in the social system, it's in every system. And so we have been being abused every day since we've been here. We need to consider, right now, a lot of people are excited about how a bunch of white folks are coming out protesting and are acknowledging structural racism. And many of us feel really good about that. But don't allow yourself to be rocked to sleep. What I would ask our white allies, would you be willing to allocate 8 to 10 states so that black people in America could set up an independent nation of our own? Now, I'm pushing the envelope. I know many of us may not be ready to have that conversation, but we're starting to have the conversation about reparations. But real reparations, we need land so that we can build a nation. We can build and create our own institutions. We need to be able to educate our own children. We need to be able to police our own communities. Now, I say this. For those of us that may think that's going too far, that's not going to happen. The United States of America has gone all over the world and has divided nations where people have had problems. She went into Korea and made 2 countries, North Korea and South Korea. She went into Germany. They made Eastern Germany and Western Germany. They went into Iraq and they cut out Kuwait and made a separate nation for Kuwait. They went into Palestine and they took out some of that land from Palestine and made the state of Israel. So America has gone all over the world, dividing nations where there has been a conflict. Well, I don't think any of those people have had a longer, deeper conflict than the conflict between black and white people in America. So if you can go to somewhere else and allocate some land, black people in this country, we have just as much right to this land because it is our sweat, blood, and tears that built this country. It is our work that is the economic engine behind America. So if you have the will to go and create other nations, other places, why not here? And it doesn't have to be a hostile or negative. We don't have to leave as enemies. We know that America was once a part of England, but they had a problem and they separated. Now America and England are allies. So our white allies, if you really are an ally to us, then let's divide some of this country, because we can be here protesting, and we was here before. All those pictures up there, we had the same energy. And what happens when the cameras go away? We're back at it with another case. So we got to look at ourselves. We look crazy because insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Muhammad. Real quick, and I just want to make this point, and I think Rasan and I had this conversation all the time, that when I was a kid growing up in Linden Street housing projects, there was Maus, like my uncle, who would pick me up, put me in the car, and they'd be talking about all this COINTELPRO and J. Edgar Hoover and reparations. This was in the 60s and 70s. And most of us, black folks, like my mother, would say, oh, they just crazy, they just militant. We're having an awakening now, where we're now having real conversations about Confederate soldiers and their names and what that means in terms of how embedded white supremacy in this country. I just want us, as we listen to Minister Randy Muhammad, is to be open about conversations. If we're gonna have a policy conversation as black people, we gotta have a whole policy conversation about defunding, about new land, about reparations. Do not be afraid to have a conversation. And I'm gonna tell you, because I think some of us in this room are in white folks conversations. They get in the room, they get both bookends of the conversation and what they're gonna do and what the solution is. So I just wanna challenge people, be willing to do that when it's just us. I wanna go to Abergall. We got Kevin, young brother, but Abergall represents young people. Abergall has his own personal story, which I hope you share as well. But you're on the front lines of dealing with our young people, and then you're getting them out to deal with our young people on the street. Can you talk a little bit about, and respond to whatever you want, law enforcement, Brother Muhammad's comment, Rasan, some of the personal stories. You got a lot to add to this conversation.
It's a pleasure to be with all the brothers here to talk about this issue. I gotta honestly say, like, parts of this is frustrating for me, right? Like, I heard the word shocked, and I was like, shocked? Like, when the hell, like, this has been the pattern of the history of us in this country. Every day as a black man living in Boston, I've seen so much violence by officers against black men. I've been a recipient of that. You know, I was a first-time offender that received 10-year mandatory sentence when that truth in sentencing and all that happened, and didn't have any prior convictions. So I did 10 years from the age of 21 to 31. I'm like, when I saw the situation with George Floyd, I wasn't even shocked. I'm gonna be honest with you, it actually took me a minute to process it. It took me about a week to actually feel the pain of what happened, because I realized that there was nothing new for me as a black man, and I wasn't surprised at all at what I saw. So we keep having this conversation and we're telling all these stories, but every black man in this room and every black person who's listening to this, we know this stuff, man. Like, we don't have to keep, because actually some of this is re-traumatizing, to be honest with you, right? To sit here and listen to that young brother talk about going to prison, you know, for 6 weeks, not knowing, having a clue what prison looked like. That was me at 21 when they threw me in there before they classified people and put me in a cell with a man who was doing life, where that man could have raped me and done anything to me. If I wasn't standing up for myself, I'd have got raped in that joint. You feel me? So when I hear this stuff, it's somewhat like re-traumatized. I'm saying we need to be talking about how white privilege has actually come into every system in this country. That white man with his foot on his neck, watching that brother die and not caring, with his hands in his pocket like he's at Popeyes, was about white privilege. And it wasn't just about law enforcement. For me, it was about the judicial system that refuses to hold people accountable. You only do what you think you can get away with. Listen, I was a drug dealer. I'm gonna admit it. I was a drug dealer. But I only did that because I was influenced at some point by a generation of men before me who said, you can get away with this. I didn't do it because I thought I was gonna get caught. So what we're seeing in these systems is really a system of racism that has permeated these systems within our country, that people think that they have the right and the privilege to do these things, right? The other piece I think that's important is that we can keep talking about law enforcement, but how do we start to really talk about accountability? right? So policy is up here. We can have the policy, you know, and I believe in that. There's a both and. But there needs to be some systems of accountability that will, when these policies pass, when regulations change, when the Massachusetts Department of Corrections start to think about the regulations that are allowing men in there and women who are being abused, there are everyday policies that no one's holding the individuals accountable to. So we need to think about how do we really come together collectively and think about how do we have oversight boards? How do we have people who are going to really be paying attention to what's happening to us on the ground? Because this issue is bigger than just talking about these scenarios over and over again. And I totally agree. We've been here before. So for me, I keep telling people, like, I'm in phase 1 of this. Like, I'm not even, like, excited about all of this. Because I need to see, like, you know, there's this brother that put out, really quickly, a DVD, and it talks about 381 days. And what he's talking about is in the civil rights movement, there was a sacrifice that was made where people boycotted getting on buses for 381 days. And if you think about right now, and I said to myself, 381 days, I said, but, you know, my kids got like Nintendo Switch, you know, people are used to watching cable, you know, people are going to Popeyes and eating all the time, you know, people are enjoying life. It will take us triple that in a sacrifice to get what we really want out of what we're talking about right now. So what I'm invested in and really want to commit myself to after someone who's been in the system now, let me just say this. Like, I grew up on the back end of busing. When I was in elementary school, I was 5 years old, started elementary school. They used to have to create gauntlets for us to walk through. Because people used to be spitting at us. They used to be outside on the dogs. I literally live on the other side of the track. So I live right below Charlotte, went to Patrick O'Hearn. Every day when we came out of school, they had to create lines, gauntlets of bodies where people were out there with dogs. You know, just recently I shared with my mom that, like, this is how numb I was to it. Every day when I walked to school, white people left their houses and left their dogs off the leash. So when I would walk to school, I would jump on 4 or 5 cars because I would get chased by dogs all the way to school. Right? So I grew up on that era. Then I went into the era of, you know, the drugs and all that stuff and crack cocaine and all that stuff coming in our community. Then the Charles Stewart that you mentioned. I never forget that night. That night when we were out there and we saw thousands of police cars flying through the community, throwing people on the ground, threw us on the ground. Listen, this stuff that we've been living with for years, man, it's like when I hear this word, shocked, by black men in this room, I'm surprised at you. I'm just gonna be honest, because I'm saying, like, this has been our reality forever. So I think the question is, how are we gonna come together and really have a core conversation? I think this is what this brother was saying here about, like, the accountabilities. How are we gonna hold ourselves accountable to thinking about what the sacrifice is gonna be and how we're gonna leverage the positions and roles that we're in to really create some change? And at the end of the day, when I say this on the behalf of the young folks are not about asking anymore. So let's be clear, like, all the asking that we have done, they're not about asking. They're making demands, right? And so I was having a conversation with this young person. I said, you know, I want to apologize to you for parts of the civil rights movement and why. I said, because in 60 years, your grandchildren are going to have to go back to white people and ask them, can I vote again? That's a damn shame. Right? So parts of what Steve Tompkins talked about the system, right, and slavery, right? We need to be fighting for our human right in this country to say the 5th Amendment and 14th Amendment that allows people to be property when they get arrested to be changed. Like, if white people are serious, let's edit the Constitution. If you're really serious, let's edit the Constitution, because these are the things that actually are perpetuating the problem. All right, so thank you for giving me a chance to say something, but I just really want to say that, like, I'm here to really think about the sacrifice and really say that I feel the pain of all of us, and I think we have to come up with solutions and an action plan.
So just so we get clarity around when we said the word shock, if whichever one of us said shock, I don't think there's a brother who grew up in the hood was shocked. I think the reality is, because we got these phones now, that he would do it on camera. that he thought he could just murder a man on the street openly, because that's what's different right now, right? Because otherwise the story, they could say, well, he attacked me, he resisted arrest. That's the work that we would do. They would come up with an excuse, and who knew, right? Who could tell the truth? We weren't there. So I think what you're seeing play out now with Tamir Rice, and that story touches me most because I have a 12-year-old. And I played with toy guns. I was that little kid in Washington Park, now Malcolm X Park, running around with my little toy gun. In Linden Street housing projects in Derby Park, running around with my toy gun, and they pull up within a few feet and shoot you within seconds. Don't ask questions. So I want to make sure we get that. Raise your hands if you were shocked by the murders. I want to make that clear. Look, Conan, I want to go to you, my brother's keeper, I mean, I'm gonna tell you, for those of us who grew up around the way, I was one of those dudes. I played ball. I was essentially was a good kid. I was good in school, but I hung out a lot. My family was in gangs. My uncles was in gangs. Many of them were in prison, so I spent a lot of time at Norfolk, Walpole, every weekend, sitting with the big long, the high gates with the guard, with the police guard. You've had a lot of experience, Conan, in your lifetime, and you've gone through some of what Abigail and Kev and others have gone through. Share your story and where you think we need to go, because folks are asking online is what do we do? So we're going to make a shift around broader racism issues and off law enforcement. I want to go back to law enforcement, particularly with Eddie from Amlio, but I want you to share your story as well.
So I'll just say, Mike, thank you for having all of us here. I think that this conversation is long overdue. We have these conversations in our smaller subgroups, and we connect with each other to check in, but I think it's so important to bring us all together. One thing I want to address with us brothers in the room, we got to get away from this exceptionalism within our own self. Because the only way things change is if when I look at you, I see myself. And we got to do that to every young brother that we see out there. The greatest gift about this room is this room. And no matter what title we are, as we see, that the police don't discriminate and societal racism doesn't discriminate. So we have to get away from this exceptionalism within our own culture. We got to recognize that we are one another. That's one. Secondly, as a person who's been incarcerated, man, since the age of 11, a young brother that grew up in Dorchester and Roxbury has been getting incarcerated all the way to I did 10 years in prison, and I go back behind the wall often and bring commissioners and elected officials back behind there. The goal is to make sure that we're showing the humanity of each and every one of us. Yes, I've been able to come home and find a level of success, whatever that looks like, but the whole mindset is to make sure that folks don't look at me and think there's any exceptionalism in me. There's brilliant brothers behind the wall. There's great minds behind there. And so I'm just an example of what comes from that space. That's two. This is traumatizing as a conversation because as soon as I came in here and I looked at those pictures, all of a sudden it got real. I went from hugging these brothers and loving on them because I've communicated with them in different ways, but this actual pictures is re-traumatizing for me. I'll give you a short story. My wife, who was an elected official, she came from a vacation. I brought her, we was going on Dorchester Avenue to get some food before we went home. I pulled over because we was gonna go into a restaurant. A big suburban truck, black suburban truck rolled up on us and said, "Are you lost?" 2 white officers. And me, I'm not one of those smiling Negroes just because. So I turned around and said, "Are you?" And he said, "What?" You know, they got all hot, bothered and stuff. And then they looked further in the car and said, "It feels good to have a title," and rolled off. That's the things that we're dealing with within the systematic part of racism and within our structures.
And Conan, please tell who your wife is.
Oh, my wife is Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Back then, she was a city councilor. I don't mind speaking of my wife. My greatest title was husband and father. You know, I don't give a damn what title I have. That's my greatest title. When I look at our brothers in law enforcement, they are my brothers. I love them like I love anybody else in this room. We fought hard. I was on the front lines of fighting hard so they were in the position that they're in the back rooms with this. Now that they're here, what are we gonna do to support them so they can clean up some of the mess? And they gotta be willing to clean up some of the mess because it is a mess in there.
Conan, do me a favor, because I didn't want to do this now, but I think it's the right place to do it because of your work with your wife. What is our conversation we should have with black women about this moment we're in? I don't know, we've had conversations in pockets. There's a conversation that we're having now among black men. There's definitely a conversation we need to have as a black family, Minister Muhammad. There's a conversation we need to have. What conversation do you have with your wife about where we're at?
One of the things that me and my wife make sure is that we're not trying to play Who's Hurt Olympics, right? Because I think that this conversation's been going up on social media where black women are tired of being at the harm of this, where black men is at the harm of this. Listen, we're hurting as a black family. And we need to make sure when we're having these conversations, we're having them as a family and not trying to figure out whose hurt is harder than the next. That's one. Secondly, I think that every time we leave the house, our black women are fearful. And that needs to be understood and needs to be said because they're fearful of whether we'll make it back. They're not naive to the realities of race and racism and whether we'll be back or not, but they're also not harmed to the reality of other brothers killing each other. And so we need to be making sure that when we're addressing these conversations, one, we're having that from a family perspective and not looking at me versus you.
Yeah. I want to dip here and then I'm going to come back to you, Reverend Dickerson, and some others in the back. I want to go back to law enforcement, maybe start with you, Steve. Do we have courage in this moment? Because I think what happens is black folks, whether it's corporate America, we have a lot of brothers here with high positions in corporate America. I have a pretty high position, deputy CEO of an organization, is whether we're ready for the moment. Because sometimes we have these titles and we're not ready to be disruptive and change the systems that we're in. You've been talking about reentry and how our jail system works. And then I want to get the others, Chief Green, Commissioner Gross, and even get Eddie in here with Mamleo. Are we going to stand up to this moment? Because the door is open to have that conversation about how we dismantle white supremacy in law enforcement. What are you thinking?
Well, the short answer is yes. I go back to what I mentioned earlier about this pandemic. This pandemic has essentially stopped everything. And this is our moment to really have these kind of conversations and working with brothers and working with sisters and working with white folk to say, okay, like some have said, enough is enough, but now we got to put a little meat on the bone. We have to make things happen. And like you said, we have enough brothers, a lot of brothers in this room that do have influence, that do have financial wherewithal, that can get stuff done. That you take an Arbugal, you take a Conan, you take some of these brothers who also have the ear of our youth. And that's really crucially important to get our youth. And if you look at all of these protests, a lot of them are being led by youth. And so they're going to take us forward with this. But I just want to address something about the incarceration system. So I arrived there in 2002 at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department with my predecessor, Andrea Cabral. And there were several things that we noticed clearly that there were far too many brothers in a situation where they shouldn't have been.
What percentage of your jail is African American and Latino?
So we have, out of the almost 1,000 inmates that we have there, 65% is black or brown. 65% is black and brown in the Commonwealth with that same demographic is 18%. So how do you get 65 out of 18? That's ignorance, that's arrogance, and that's racism. And that's the inability for folk to come together, to say, folk within the system, to come together and say, this is going to stop. And so what we've begun to do at the Sheriff's Office, you've been there talking to the brothers. You did a book drive that was really
New Jim Crow.
The New Jim Crow, and we're still giving those books away to people inside. Darrell's been there. We're working with the mayor's office on reentry. We've had several city council meetings inside. When the DAs was running a year ago, 2 years ago, when Rachel won that, we had all 6 of them in there. July 7th, we're bringing Kennedy and Markey in there to talk to these brothers in there and the sisters in there because they can't get out to go to a town hall forum like this. So we're going to bring all of that inside. But what we've done, Michael, is this. We have 2 academies every year, between 25 and 40 people. My predecessor, it wasn't even me, my predecessor said that each one of the academies now has to have at least 50% people of color in each academy. She also said that 50% of each academy has to live in Suffolk County. And the reason for that is you had cats from Maine and New Hampshire and Duxbury. They didn't know these cats, so they can say dumb stuff and do dumb stuff to the cats in there and not worry about bumping to them in the movie theaters or the supermarket. Now, I got a guy who's going back to a home in Dorchester, and I've got an officer who lives in Dorchester. Check it. You're gonna bump into this cat. And so you really need to understand how to deal with him. And this is not a panacea. We have, as I mentioned earlier, cultural change takes a long time, and we've got a long way to go. Right now, I've got a disruption with some of my officers now, where a white officer gets on social media dogging out a black officer, saying that you need to go back to where you came from. Actually, go the F back to where you came from. And so that on Monday, we have to have a whole big thing with all of the officers there to say, yo, check this out. That's not how this, oh, I'm sorry, I was about to swear. That's not how this works anymore.
You can get away with that in here.
Yeah, okay, all right, we ain't having that shit anymore. All right, because since 2002, they've only known a black sheriff between Andrea Cabral and myself, and believe it, I'm grooming the next one so that when I leave, there's still a person of color. Because we have far too many people that really should be in a substance abuse bed or a mental health bed and not in a jail bed, you see.
Yeah.
And until the legislators, and we've been talking to Russell about this and his colleagues, Ruck Holmes and his colleagues, until the legislators grab a hold of their stones and put some money into beds outside of incarceration facility, then this is going to keep happening, and it can't. We can no longer have this. So I think this is a great opportunity.
So I'm going to work my way to Rep. Holmes because I want to talk about solutions in a second. But I want to, Commissioner, I know the news cycle in the last 24, 48 hours has been around Attorney General Barr's visit.
Absolutely.
And I want you to talk, because you did a press conference, but I know Thaddeus weighed in. I know Rassan and I have had conversations. I think some other folks have called me, text me. But I want to have this conversation with you and talk a little bit about why you met with Attorney General Barr.
Thank you.
And lay the context that I think what you're hearing from people is that this is one of the, if not next to Woodrow Wilson, the most racist administration we've ever seen. And they were all racist, right?
Absolutely.
But we're seeing a type of racism that is permeating throughout the administration. And Barr is perpetrating a lot of that racism, right?
Yes.
He dismantled much of what we were able to accomplish under Obama. So I think when people said, okay, you're going to meet with him, we're saying, what did you ask of him? What did you demand of him? And I think that's part of the conversation about what you're hearing. And I know Thaddeus posted online, I want Thaddeus to weigh in on this as well, made a comparison to John Lewis meeting with Governor Wallace, right? So I want you to talk a little bit about what your thought was, and I want people to react to that conversation.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. And I am a student of history. MLK is one of my heroes. And one of the things he said, you can't be silent. So when Goliath, this is how it happened. Goliath asked to meet with me to get my opinion on police reform and what's going on in the country. He also stated, people do know you and know you for you'll tell it like it is. So the man came in, he sat down, I said, you're gonna get my perspective as a black man and as the first African-American commissioner and as commissioner. So I don't know how much time we got, but before I go further, I did not okay any photos. He said, you want to take a personal picture? May I? Sure. I'm like, no tweeting, no Instagram, no nothing, right? That's on me. And if it gave people the wrong image, that's on me. But that will also give you an opportunity for me to educate you about who I am and what I stand for. And I'm not a black man that is going to be silent when overseers from the past that says, shut up, you talk when I want you to talk, you talk to whoever I want you to talk to, and stay in your corner. I'll give up this job before any of that bullshit happens in my life. But anyway, he sat across me, we talked about police reform and what it looks like, and what black people are feeling in America, and people of color, even biracial. We talked about the true definition of Black Lives Matter. I talked about the demonstrations in Boston. And then pretty much these white anarchists destroy property, trying to set fires, yelling Black Lives Matter. I'm like, we are not the militant ones. As you stated, my brother, we were forced into this country. And I said from centuries to decades coming up now, and I used a point of reference from the 50s, the Jim Crow era, right? Ended in 55, which took that long. I said, the grandmothers and grandfathers of today were the young black men and women back then. I said, if nothing's happened from that time, that people of color were dying at the hands of the executive branch of the United States and the judicial system, if nothing's happened, people will say Black Lives Matter. That is not militant, that is people wanting to have their voice heard, right? And just like in any group, you're gonna have people that are this way or that way, but the definition of Black Lives Matter is the moniker that it is. Our lives matter. So and then I went into, we need to have the conversation. I said, 8 can't wait. I said, for BPD, in the study of 21st century policing, at the behest of President Obama, led by Charles Ramsey, At the end of this study that was set forth because of black and brown men being shot, President Obama said something shocking in relationships to community policing and how things should be done. He says, if you want to learn it, go to Boston. Boston? Oh shit. The most racist city, most racist police department. The A can't wait. I told him, we have those in place. The language has to be tweaked so you don't have to go find where it says de-escalation. You don't have to go find where it says other things that are conducive to law enforcement and the community together. And then we spoke about the importance of what the governor signed in, that you cannot have officers go from town to town to town and not be checked. You can't hide behind sealed documents. You have to make sure that a racist officer here, an abusive officer here, no matter what color, can't go from town to town. And then we talked about the murder of Mr. George Floyd. I looked him in his face. I said, there's a lot of pain out there, and here's why. This isn't like someone being shot. Oh, that's quick, they mention on TV, you don't get to see it. This is a man, a black man, that we saw murdered slowly for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And I told him that. I said, the people filming, were filming people that were supposed to serve and protect them, and they turned from police officers to murderers in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And you're right, the look on, I don't even call him officer, that coward's face is like, I own you, like he's a bird of prey, as Mr. Floyd called out for his mother's name. And I said, here's what we need, U.S. Attorney. We have to have the hard discussions. I said, the way I honor Mr. Floyd's death and pay him homage is, I go and talk to different people. I split that time, 4 minutes and 23 seconds. I'm gonna tell you who I am, my heritage, what I believe. And then I'll afford you 4 minutes and 23 seconds, then you expound upon that. I said, those conversations have to be heard.
If I could, Commissioner, I just want to get some reactions to it, too.
But just so you know, I'd be goddamn if I didn't give him an earful and tell how I felt as a black man and what we're doing in Boston. Don't let that picture define me. As one of my older brothers said, hey, I didn't authorize it, but I apologize if anyone got the wrong image to that, but I'll be damned if I'm gonna run from Goliath if he comes to Boston. Because black men should, if you represent this office, tell Goliath what's up.
So I appreciate that
Thank
perspective.
you.
I do want to catch Thaddeus, Rasan, and Ricky. So I'm going to start with you, Rasan, because I know we've had these conversations. What's your perspective having heard the commissioner? And we've been in this place before, whether it's racist governors, racist mayors, CEOs, or in this case, an attorney general.
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment behind Commissioner's reason behind having that conversation, but there's also a reason why leaders of nations say they don't negotiate with terrorists, because that lends credibility to the person who is engaged in terroristic conduct. We can have conversations. James Baldwin says we can disagree and still love one another unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and the denial of my rights and humanities. And Attorney General Barr's disagreement with black folks is rooted in our oppression and the denial of our rights and humanities. Attorney General Barr is the same person who is standing behind separating families at the border. He's the same person standing behind deporting people. He's the same person standing behind pulling back the Department of Justice from conducting pattern and practice investigations in police departments across the country. He's the same man that had the audacity to say that he does not believe that institutional or structural racism exists in policing. And so absent you, Commissioner, saying, I too have structural racism in my department, there's nothing that you could say that is going to change his mind. If he wants to have a come to Jesus moment and feel good, he can go watch TD Jakes on TBN. But that's something that is something that I just don't think is serving us. And I appreciate your desire to embrace your manhood and say, I'm going to talk to who I want to, but there are also political consequences that go along with that, particularly when our Attorney General is in litigation against him, particularly when we have Congresswoman Presley, who is filing legislation that is challenging some of the very initiatives that this administration is pursuing. And so now, like, this is political puppetry, or maneuvering rather, to say I went and spoke to Commissioner Gross, who's the leader in community policing and is a black police commissioner. And that just lends credibility to a fraudulent administration. And so it doesn't serve us. And to, you know, to compare that visit to the visit of John Lewis visiting George Wallace was not at the height of his powers of white supremacy where he was wringing the necks of black folks. He was on his deathbed, dying, and that's John Lewis's last farewell to him to say, yeah, look who's dying now. So it's not comparable.
Let me go to Thaddeus, because I know that conversation played online. Then I want to go back to Ricky. Go ahead, Thaddeus. Yep, right here.
Yeah, so I understand all of this, but I think the first thing I want to say is, one, I've been a victim of the noble cause policing, right? Because sometimes we get this racism and noble cause policing mixed up. And if you don't know what noble cause policing is, you should look it up, right? Because that's the reality. So when I think about the commissioner and I think about myself, I think about a lot of the conversations I have with Ricky, the conversations I have with Conan, conversations I have with Abigail. Not everybody's going to be me, right? So that's the first thing I think of. I think when I listen to Joe, when I listen to this brother about staying in our lane and understanding the other consequences, I want to make sure that we do that. Because some of these same brothers and sisters that's been out here talking about the commissioner are the same ones that stood beside the mayor when the mayor didn't give us anything. We got less than 1% of black businesses that are doing business. So if you're gonna tell me about him talking to somebody else, then talk on those particular pieces too. These are the same ones that's talking when I've been in the room with other people that is prominent, that are not giving black people opportunities, that don't say shit. But they're out here saying they can say all of this shit now, right? So for me, that's my thing. Understand who he is. So like the picture thing, yeah, that messed me up too. But the reality is, I know who he is as a man. I'm going to look at his opportunity. I'm going to sort of see what's there. And I understand John Lewis and I understand all those other components. But I also understood 2 days before he met with him that it was Floyd and some of the other families that met with Trump. Right? So there's a conversation in this community and other communities that need to be had that's just not the politics of it. Sometimes we need to jump in folks' face and say what it is that we've got to say and deal with the consequences of what that looks like. And if the commissioner felt that as a black man that he wanted to stand up and do that, then I'm gonna support what that is. When Tito ran for office and the black folks was dogging him out, I stood up and said, hey, the reality of it is, I'm proud that he's a black man saying what it is that he wants to say, and he had the courage to run while everybody else here is dogging him because of whatever else it is. So there's sometimes I feel like we as black men are dogging each other out because that person is not us and not doing what it is that we want them to do. And we, as a group and as a collective, we can deal with Barr in whatever way. My brother here has the intellect, the capacity, and connections to deal with all of those issues that he just raised up, right? But if we don't have conversations and we just say, stay over here, stay over here, I don't want to talk to you. You know, the fact that the mayor says he doesn't want to talk to him, he doesn't know anything about the meeting, right? For me, that's an issue. Yeah. Right? And so I know that's my 2 minutes.
I'm coming back to you though,
but that's just where I'm at.
Ask you too. So I want to jump real quick, catch the people we haven't gone to. I'm going to get you. I see the people that got their hands up. Let me go to Ricky. Important that we have, I've never seen a disruptive DA in this area like this DA has been. We've seen Marilyn Mosby, who's actually a Roxbury, Boston kid, being disruptive. Both parents police officers. But I want you to talk about the work you're doing at the DA's office. I'm on panels all the time with DA Rollins. She says stuff that when I think about Dan Conley, in my meetings with Dan,
it's a different ball game.
It's a whole different world than Dan Conley. Talk about what's going on at DA's office and what you've heard.
So I'm just, thank you for inviting me, Michael. Excited to be with all the brothers in here today. In 1970, right, towards the end of the 1960s, early 1970s, we had 300,000 people in prison. 300,000 people in prison, right? Now, if we didn't have let's pretend we didn't have the next 40 years. Let's pretend we didn't know what was going to happen the next 40 years. We might project, because we had the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Act, that the numbers in prison, particularly for black men, would go down. The exact opposite took place. Through intentional language by presidents in this country and legislation, we've talked about it, war on crimes, war on drugs, we've talked about, right? We decimated black families. We lost our fathers. We lost our brothers. We lost our uncles. We lost our cousins, not just to death, but to prison.
Yes.
So when we talk about reform, it's not just police. And we can't just lean on the legislators. We got to talk about our state's attorneys and our district attorneys across the country, because they're responsible with the application of the law. They're the ones who bring the charges. So even if something faulty happens with the police, the person to really give it credibility are our DAs and our state's attorneys, right? So I just want to talk about three things. Now we have Rachel Rollins. She's the district attorney of Suffolk County. She's the first black woman district attorney in Massachusetts history, right? Rachel is gangster. And she's fighting for everybody. And there's three policies that she's implemented that I just want to highlight, right? That I want to encourage, right? Whoever's watching across the country, when we elect our DAs and our state's attorneys, these are the kinds of things we need to think about. So we mandated that our assistant district attorneys, when a family walks in, whether it's a family, a brother or sister, when they walk in, she's mandated that they figure out what is the root cause for why they have entered this courtroom today. It's not just about whatever the behavior was that brought them in. Is there a root cause? Is there substance abuse? Is there mental health issues? Is there housing issues? Are there other social issues that contribute in a large way for why they're encountering the criminal justice system? Then from there, decide if they don't need the criminal justice system in their life, pre-arraignment diversion, before anything even goes on your record that's going to impact you to get jobs and work, right? We want to send you to where you can get the necessary help you need, right? So that's number one, that she's highlighted that. I know the DA's office was doing that allegedly, but that's something that she campaigned on and highlighted. When we trained our new ADAs that came in that were mostly white, we brought in survivors. We brought in returning citizens. We brought in community organizational leaders to come in and talk with them. We watched those white lawyers weep because she told them, you have the ability to take someone's freedom away. You must have some context for what black people go through. That's number one. The second thing that Rachel's in that I want to highlight is put together an integrity review unit, right? So the integrity review unit is for cold cases. Right, so you can literally call the office, speak to the chief of that unit, and say, hey, there was a case, my father, my brother, my auntie, someone went through this, here was the year, right? And there's a process in place now where you can literally apply to get a case open. Doesn't mean it will. There's a process we have to go through internally to figure out whether or not it's legitimate, but there's a process in place. And then the third thing that she's done is a discharge integrity team, right? Any police involved shooting, there's a group that meets to discuss that, right? She's a part of that group. She convenes that group. It happens monthly. They meet monthly. And so I just think we've got to talk about our DAs. We've got to talk about our state's attorney because they're going to apply the law. Once the case comes in, they're going to bring the charges. So it's not just the police. It's not just our legislators. It's also our state's attorneys and our district attorneys.
Thank you, Ricky. One thing you made me think about, and I want to lift up his name, Detective Wayne Rock. Detective Rock and I went to law school together, but I met Detective Rock when my nephew was murdered. Michael Williams was killed, and I went to a LAMP meeting with my sister. And it was really for survivors of murdered family members. And I remember Detective Rock walked into that meeting with a map of Boston, so all of our neighborhoods. And all the black dots were the solved murders, and the red dots were the unsolved murders from every neighborhood in the city. And if you watched this map and you saw all those red dots in Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, it asked the question, do Black Lives Matter? Was there anybody solving those murders? My sister still does not know who murdered my nephew in Columbia Point, from Columbia Point. So there's a lot of people walking around, and I lift up Tina Cherry and Mona Lisa, Priscilla Flint, the Flint family. All those families have been fighting when nobody else was paying attention to those survivors of murdered families. So I wanted to make sure I lifted that up. I want to grab people that have not talked. Let me go to Phil, Supreme, and Mr. Watkins, and then I'm going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with a whole bunch of you we haven't gotten to yet. Phil, WGBH, Phil Martin. And we want to say thank you to WGBH that's broadcasting this as well. And a lot of our team here to help put this together was the support of WGBH. Phil.
Hey, first of all, I am just absolutely blown away by the discussions taking place here today. And the organization, Mike, is just absolutely extraordinary. The back and forth is extraordinary, it's dynamic. And in many ways, it's unprecedented, the number of people in this room, these brothers, and the discussions that are taking place. Having said that, let me say this. I've been listening to the discussion and connecting the dots. And the dots are well connected historically. And when I think about, I'm just thinking about this discussion about Barr and about this whole notion of the appearance of truth. There's a term that's called verisimilitude. And verisimilitude means the appearance of truth. This administration, and some of the stories I've covered, basically give you an idea of what it means by the appearance of truth. The appearance of truth was when DJ Henry, a story I covered in 2010, I think I was the first person in Boston on the scene in Mount Pleasant, New York, when this young man was murdered. Wasn't just killed, he was murdered. The circumstances of this case pointed to a murder. But the appearance of truth was that this was something that just happened, something that was rationalized. Aaron Hess, the officer who killed him, was later awarded Officer of the Year. That was considered the truth. But what was considered true about that was that he was a good officer. That was not true.
Phil, just to stop you for a second, just so people have the context for DJ Henry's story, right? Pace University student, upper middle class family, very politically connected. He's a student at a party with his black and white friends. Fight breaks out at the party, somewhere in the party. He's not involved. He exits the bar, gets in the car with his friends, makes a turn in front. An officer tells him to move his car. Another officer claims that he was going to run him over, jumps on the car and shoots into the car, injures people in the car and kills him. Interesting about that case is people didn't want it to be about race. That we wanted to keep that out of race, that it wasn't about race, but finish the story.
But what this was about was rationalizing his death. Michael Brown rationalized his death, he was a thug. DJ Henry rationalized his death, they said he was drunk. Rationalizations and the appearance of truth. The appearance of truth, for example, is when the President of the United States and William Barr say they are interested in justice. That's the appearance of truth, but that's simply not true based on their actions. The appearance of truth is when you stage a photo op in front of a church to talk about law and order and toughness. That's supposed to be the appearance of truth, but that's a photo op. The commissioner, I have no doubt the commissioner went into this thinking that he was having a serious dialogue with William Barr. But what William Barr is interested in the appearance of truth, the idea of projecting toughness and fairness. But the fairness part is gone. I think, for me, when I think about connecting the dots, I think about the history that's been written in the modern history is based largely on how do you basically eviscerate or make moot this is the question. How do you eviscerate or make moot the effects of the 13th and 14th Amendment, particularly the 14th Amendment, that dealing with equal protection? You make moot by basically creating rationalizations and the appearance of truth. You do that also by creating a system that basically supplants what might have been intended in terms of equal protection. And that system was called, and Michelle Alexander coined it correctly, the new Jim Crow. The new Jim Crow is not simply a way of social control in terms of our criminal justice system, but it seeps across all of our systems into our economic foundations. It is a way of social control, and it's just one example of the racial caste that we're dealing with in this country. It exists in my profession, media. As an investigative reporter, I've seen racial caste manifest. We have lots of names on this stage and lots of photos, but there are thousands more. One name that might be missing, and a face that's missing from this group, is a man named Yuri Stamps, a 68, 69-year-old man killed murdered, if you will, by a SWAT team in Framingham, Massachusetts, around the same year that in 2010, or perhaps it was a little later, as DJ Henry. It's important to note that this was rationalized. The appearance of truth was that he was a drug dealer. He was not. The appearance of truth was that they were breaking into the house in order to serve a warrant on his son. But the truth is, he was a black man, another body. And the questions asked about how do you make moot the 13th and 14th Amendment is manifest in the death of people like DJ Henry and is manifest in the deaths of Yuri Stamps. You do it by rationalizing their deaths.
Yep.
That's the appearance of truth. We saw it with Michael Brown. We've seen it with others. And we cannot allow photo ops. We cannot allow, and again, I point to the Bible, very famous, now famous photo of the president in Washington, D.C., holding the Bible. That is representative of many photos around the country that are supposed to substitute as truth. But there's only one truth, and that truth is that we are dealing with massive amounts of injustice in our nation. And the only way that we're going to basically transcend that is basically to differentiate the appearance of truth from truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Yep. Thank you. Let me move quick, and then I'm guarantee you, because we have an hour, I'm going to cover a lot of you in the last hour. Supreme was third vice president NAACP when I was president. And I mentioned this in your intro when I mentioned you earlier, Supreme. Some people view the NAACP as a bougie black organization. I'm from the projects, grew up in the projects. I lived in Roxbury most of my life. First one to own a home. First one to own a home, first one to go to college, all of that. My sister was a crack addict, my uncles were murdered, my aunt was murdered, so I understood that. But you kept me grounded because you had me go visit the prisons.
Absolutely.
You had me walk the street and hang out with cats on the corner and have these conversations. Conversations we're having now, you and I would have them on Blue Hill Ave.
Yes.
So talk about what you've seen, Supreme, and the work that you do and what you've heard today.
Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, first off, I'm gonna say thank you, Michael. The reunion is great. You know, I've worked with this man, his right hand, to try to make sure that he was tuned into the community where the NAACP wasn't tuned in. And I'm gonna say this to all you elected officials out there, all right? If you ain't walking in your corners, if you ain't getting out from behind your desk, then you really don't know the truth, okay?
Amen.
And I'm gonna tell you all straight out like this. I love the meetings about the meetings. All it shows me is you know the problem. Why aren't you stepping up, coming together, figuring it out? Because it's all about, like Martin said for us, changing the process, changing their policy, getting at the table. Yeah, like this man says, let's attack that Constitution. I have never been 3/4 or 3/5. So why is it still there? We just had a black president. Why isn't it removed? These are the things that we need to attack because laws was made without us. We weren't at the table. We weren't there. So if we weren't there, not there, then these laws don't apply to us. They're not for us. And now that we are at the table, it's time for us to make the laws that work for us because I'm not gonna let my son grow up and not have the courage he needs to do to be who he needs to be because of a color. I'm not gonna allow that. That's not gonna happen. And I do this with my young youth all the time. Yes, they're angry. Yes, they wanna tear up stuff, but that's not the answer. The answer is absolutely attacking their systematic system. And that means changing their language, changing their policy.
Supreme, I got a question for you. So, and I haven't asked this yet, but I wanna get into it with you. So I struggle with what to tell my sons, right? I have 3 sons, a 25-year-old St. John's University graduate, a 17-year-old now who you know because they grew up in the NAACP office with your son, and a 12-year-old as of June 1st, right? And I struggle with what to tell them when, like with my 12-year-old, because I know when I learned it in college, I was angry. I was ready to throw a rock through a window, burn something down when I found out the truth. I struggled with whether I should tell them when a police officer stops them to be on this heightened level of being docile when the police stop them, when a white woman can get stopped and cuss you out and still make it home. And I struggle with that. My professor, Mahmoud El-Qadi, and if he's watching online, he called that the black tax, that black people have to pay that other white people don't.
Well, Mike, I say
So I
like
want to
this.
talk, my question to you is, you have a young man who you've had in that office since he was a baby.
Yeah.
What do you feel that we should be telling our sons?
For one, I'm gonna say it like this. It's not our position to tell our children to behave or be some kind of way. That's not our position. What we do need to do is administratively change the system that meets the needs of these people who hit the streets. Some of our people have mental health, some of our stuff. And me, my son, I let him know, be who you are, because who you are is gonna be great if you speak out. Silence is no longer the option for us. You know, we have no oppressors. The only oppressors we have is the ones we have in our mind. So lose that oppression, lose that Willie Lynch, and let's figure this out, because we can figure it out. You see all these faces and places and names and people who have been affected by what? A system, a law, a process, a procedure. These officers are trained to protect themselves, but there's ways we can have that training changed where it protects our community as well. We have to live together. They come from our community.
Let me move
we
a
have to
little
live
quick,
together.
because I know we got time, and they actually tell me, let's just go through the conversation. So William Watkins, who I've known for a long time, you got to mention your frat too as you begin your remarks, because your brothers show up. When I talk about sororities and fraternities who show up.
You don't get them omegas and alphas upset around here. I already see them looking back here at me.
But I want to say that, William, because I've known you a long time, and it's a passion of yours is our people. Like, you live providing justice, seeking justice for our people. You work at the Urban League. You've been there for a long time. You now serve under the new president and CEO, Keith Motley, who we all know very well. Tell us about the work of the Urban League and how you see this conversation in this moment that we're in.
You know, Mike, I appreciate you having all of us here today. I won't say this is an overdue conversation, because we've had these conversations in the barbershops. We were just mad Corona came and we couldn't go to the barbershop and have the conversation. But what I would say is this. As I'm sitting here listening to all of these talented people, I'm saying God is awesome, because he waited until we got 2020 vision.
2020 vision, wow.
He waited until we got 2020 vision to shut down a country. And I can guarantee you, every single one of you, when a vaccine comes, they will never shut down another country, city, or state. So if we don't take this moment right here and make significant change, there is no reason why we are putting elected officials into office or appointed positions. And I shouldn't even have to say reparations. They should be walking in and saying, let me change the structures, because I don't understand why body cameras are not on every police officer. If we're fighting with a union, then hey, brother and sister, tell us you're fighting with the unions to get that done. There are so many things. Right now, I'm the director of workforce development. And before George Floyd even came into being, I was looking at the numbers in Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan of unemployment. 35% unemployment in 02124. This is what's about to happen when the vaccine comes. And when that does come, we can't be back here at the same seat, because that representation of the 35% is going to be locked up because they couldn't find a job. Some of them are not going back to work because of, hey, they gave them that $600, so some businesses are going to fall to the wayside because they can't get people back off of the roads. Man, I see dynamic brothers and sisters in this room that, look, 10% of the degree holders are black in this nation, and we only got 4 CEOs in a Fortune 500 company. There's a problem with that. I think we need to have a Rooney Rule on corporations. That's the honest to God truth. Corporations should be thinking every time somebody comes off the board that successor should be someone other than the person that was in there before.
Yeah.
We really have to push this needle right now. We're not gonna get it again. We're not gonna get it again because when corporations get back to full strength, you all had your time, and God gave us 2020 vision. He waited to 2020 for this to happen.
Yeah.
So if you don't take this moment and really harness it, I don't know, from elected to appointed, there's no reason why you're not in these positions calling for a health crisis. We shouldn't have to wait for somebody else to do it. We should already be doing it because our people was dying in the streets.
So William, I want to go to Shagun next, and I'm going to actually get to a lot of folks. Shagun, you know, I'm being a student of history, one of the things I often look back is I want people to read Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech about Abraham Lincoln. If you've never read any speech in your life, read that speech. Because I think sometimes people become heroes in American history and they leave out the activists who made it happen, right? So Frederick Douglass, they leave out. The organizations, the big 6 that were pushing Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson to get to a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act, we don't even tell that story like we should. Shagun, I want to tell that about you because I think the fact that we have body cameras in the city, when Mayor Walsh takes credit, right? Because he jumped out with Obama and he leaned in when Obama made that phone call and the commissioner. But I know the real story, right? I know that on the ground, with the Boston Police Camera Action Team, you was doing the research before they even did the research. You were digging, you were with me looking and saying, Mike, no, this is actually makes sense, it's a good policy decision. It actually benefits the police. And we need to do that.
That's true, he did.
So,
he did, another young lady, he did.
So Shagun, I want you to tell that story because people, you know, the African proverb, rivers are filled one drop at a time. Some people don't think they have influence and impact. You did that with a band of friends that just said, hey, we're going to form an organization that didn't exist, and we're going to get body cameras. And I just want you to share that and your perspective on this law enforcement conversation.
Well, first I want to make sure, I have the deepest voice in the room, so I want to make sure everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me? All right, right. No, but Mike, I appreciate your holding this, I'm going to call it a discussion. You know, conversations are really just exchanging ideas, but discussions are trying to get to solutions, and I think that's what we're here to do today. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, myself and Shakia Scott, you know, the commissioner was right to bring up, you know, the other young lady that worked with us on this, 2 graduates of Boston Latin Academy, the greatest high school in the city of Boston. But you know, at that time, because, you know, where I am today is much different than in 2014. You know, we formed BPCAT 4 days after we watched police officers attack peaceful protesters in Ferguson, Missouri, after an officer there murdered Michael Brown. And so at that time, we believed that one of the ways to ensure that justice would prevail was to ensure that there was some third-party actor that captured what happened, because oftentimes in encounters between police officers and a civilian who is black, there is only one witness because the other person is dead. And so we wanted to make sure that there was something there to capture that moment. We didn't believe it was going to eliminate racism or stop police brutality in all of its various forms, but we at least knew that because of, you know, you even brought it up earlier, the camera, whether it's on our phone or a business that happens to have a camera, as we saw with George Floyd and others with cell phones, but the fact that a camera would tell our story and thus outrage folks and some sense of justice might come about. I will say that where I am today, you know, I loved what Minister Muhammad said earlier of not just about a separate state, but at the end of the day, bringing up other parts of the conversation that we're not talking about. All of this conversation, and I guess I'll say it's intentionally a conversation because we're, you know, that we're not talking about is everything is centered around police reform. And there are hundreds of thousands of people in the street who, number one, are tired of conversation, so we don't need any more of that. But second of all, who are done with reform? Because we've been talking about, on August 28th, 1963, everyone remembers the last 4 minutes of the I Have a Dream speech, but the whole, it's 16 minutes long, so the whole first 12 minutes of it, he's talking about everything wrong with the country. Martin Luther King, if the people watching don't know. But one of the things he says is that we will never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. That was 1963, and we're still talking about it in 2020. And so the call of many of the people who are on the streets right now who are making this conversation possible, who are making it possible that white people are crying and calling us out of guilt, trying to figure out what to do with themselves and what to do in the nation, is they're calling for, we don't need the police, we know how to take care of ourselves. And so that's really the conversation. We don't need any more black faces in law enforcement, because I watched CNN. I saw 5 officers take out a Morehouse and a Spelman student out of their car, tase them just for driving down the road because it was 2 minutes past curfew that they had just heard about 15 minutes later. And 4 of those 5 officers were black. Mr. Paris Jeffries just recounted his story about 2 officers that pulled him over, arrested him for doing nothing. Those officers were black. So, I will be, good golly gee goddamn to be told that I should support someone in a position simply because they're black. At the end of the day, they're working in a space that's upholding systemic racism and white supremacy. And so really what we need to be talking about is how we re-envision, again, Mr. Watkins, who I agree with fully, talks about how we use this moment. It is not about reforming an already broken, terrible system. It is about what should the new world be, and what is going to be our role in leading it. Because the other problem, too, is that we see too many white people, elected or not, who are jumping out ahead and saying, well, here's how I'm going to fix it. Well, no. You started the problem. And we've been leading, right, in terms of we know how to get to freedom. So fall back, and we'll lead the way. You can fund it, because they got all the money, right? They got the resources. But we will, that's really, for me, what this moment is. It's us leading the way to freedom, 155 years after we were still waiting to hear back in Galveston, Texas.
So I want to get some other people, Eddie, Sergeant.
You earned that right.
I want you to speak to, again, we got there, but black law enforcement, right? We saw what happened in Atlanta, and Shagun is a Morehouse grad as well. I had all the Morehouse dudes texting me like, oh, you know Shagun. So he was amazing even on campus, like people know him. But I want you to talk about black law enforcement. You represent the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers that have been fighting against a racist hair test that eliminated some police from the police department, disparate disciplinary processes that I know too many black officers who are not on the police department right now because of racism. And the system did not treat them fairly across the country. We're not even talking about just Boston, across the country. What is your perspective of, I think both things that have been raised is, one, how do we reconcile that we're fighting for you and that you're part of a system that is also complicit in some way?
So I will say this, a couple of things to preface whatever I'm going to say as part of being a black officer who wears the blues. You are only as good as your people. I think it's Malcolm X that said that. I think if every police officer who comes into the job understands and realizes that, we'll be better off. And you look around this room, right? Most of us kind of think like this dynamic within the black community that says, you go to school, you do well, you won't be in those positions. Any single one of us could be in those positions at any given time. We have to realize that. The other thing we really have to speak to is this idea within the black community that we're all supposed to think alike. We fight the battles on different fronts. If I don't agree with someone, doesn't mean I'm not fighting the battle. So let's get that out of the way, right? So going back to Mamleo and who we are, these battles, we've been fighting for decades, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the politicians are just jumping on board now. We've been fighting the battle for diversity within the ranks. We've been fighting the battle for this hair test. That is 100% flawed because we've had people who lost their lives and livelihoods because of this flawed hair test, lost their families.
And explain the hair test issue to them as well.
The hair test that's how we test people for drugs within the police department. So the notion is that historically, black people have had false positives, and some of the explanations that the black hair follicle captures a lot more environmental factors than the white hair follicle. So we've had men, if you knew them, absolutely 100%, you'd say absolutely no way that he or she is doing this. They were fired, lost their jobs, had to go out into the public and look for a job and explain, I was fired by the Boston Police Department, by the way, and it was for drugs. Imagine walking into an interview and having to explain that. There were men, one good friend of mine, who lost his job, lost his ability to see his child because the child's mother went to court, said he's a drug user. There's no way I'm gonna allow my daughter to have interaction with him. So that's what we're talking about, real lives, all right? This was a test that we fought for years to get rid of. Former commissioner said, absolutely, it's a perfect test, there's nothing wrong with it. Not looking at the people whose lives were affected by it. I'm a firm believer, look, it's like the saying, it's better to let 100 guilty men go than to convict one innocent person. A lot of people went to the wayside as a result of that test. We've had issues with the exam process within the Boston Police Department, right? We know, like just not within the police department, a lot of standardized exams are culturally biased. We don't do as well. So one of the things I've asked is that we do a real study to find out what it takes to be a supervisor. There are people who will kill a standardized exam, have absolutely poor people skills, no leadership skills. We know that. We need to really look at the process. The other piece, Mamleo did a study some years ago and looked at the disparate punishment that's meted out to people of color. Some of those things are systemic. Some of us as black people have that same psychosis when we look at each other. We have to deal with that. If we're really gonna deal with the problems that we're having now, we can't ask the outside world to look at us and be objective and look at us as good men. We have to look at the psychosis that we all deal with as black people as a result of slavery and all the other things that have happened since. So I think we're in a position now, we have a black commissioner. One black person in a position is not gonna fix 200 plus years of history within the Boston Police Department. We all have to take a stance. And the one thing I would caution everybody here from doing is to criticize people who are fighting battles internally, who have the same goals that you do, criticize them for not doing it in the way that you'd want to do it. So I could go on forever, but we know the battle exists at all different fronts. Last but not least, this issue of attacking the police because we think that's going to fix systemic racism? No, absolutely not. I graduated from law school. When I got out of law school, like most college students, I was like, I'm going to get a job in corporate America. You look at most of those corporate firms, maybe 2% of the population of people of color. A lot of these companies have recently come out saying we support black lives. You ask them how many people on their board are people of color.
Right.
How many times have they reached out to black communities and recruited kids to come into their companies? It is not enough that we just fix it within the police department. I think the police department, unfortunately, when they mess up and they clearly show the racism that exists, it's huge because you're taking a life. But it transcends into all aspects of our lives. I had a white man last week, 2 weeks ago, try to tell me about racism because I was in a uniform. As if, because I'm in this uniform, I don't experience racism. So we have to get that. I don't want us to get to a world where we are discouraging young people of color from going into policing because we'll go right back to the world that existed in the 60s and 50s. Yes, the system needs fixing, but we can't discourage young people of color from going into policing.
So I just want to stress this. I'll come back to you, Commissioner, and others. I want to stress.
Test is gone
Yes,
because of
it is.
men like this. So, thank you.
So yes, men like that. But I would also say men like that.
Absolutely.
And a whole bunch of other women and men, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and others who've been beating this drum with Mamleo for a long time, and other activists.
We can't do it by ourselves.
And again,
no one person
we need
can
to
do
give
it.
credit where it's due, that before it becomes passed, there's somebody fighting for it when it's not popular. Real quick, because then I want to work my way around, and I'm coming to Paul and Mo and Glenn and a few other people. I want to get to Representative Holmes, because we got to start moving somewhere towards solutions too. We talk about the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus, and folks are online sending messages like, okay, we understanding you're framing the issues, but we got to start talking solutions too. So in the next 45 minutes, even if you touch on the issue, make sure you say something about a solution. And we got mad brain power in here and energy of brothers I've known for a long time. That's why I invited you. There's about 70 more brothers I could have invited, but we had to keep it to 25% of the capacity so we could socially distance. But the reality is there's a lot of people missing, but this is a unique moment. We've never had this many black people in corporate positions, at the heads of foundations, ever in the DA's office. What do we do with it? So I want to go to Representative Russell Holmes, because whether it's the Justice and Policing Act on the federal level, you've been fighting this for a long time along with the rest of the caucus. Is this a moment that we can actually get something done? I know the governor put out a bill. I know the speaker has a proposal. Where are we at, and will it be strong enough to address the issues that you've heard today?
So I'm going to do what I've been asked to do and give just a moment, because he's been anxious for about half an hour. He's been trying to get your attention. Okay. So
I want to get to everybody else, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I'm confused about. And that's why I agree with this brother. That's why some people in here used to unite. A lot of people in this room, you can walk out right here, make a phone call, and the media is going to talk to you all day. You can get on your Facebook, and you're going to get that attention all day. We're not addressing the people that are probably on Facebook right now saying, what are they talking about? Malcolm X caught on to something that we seem not have caught on. He said, make it plain. We always intellectualizing the truth. We got to make it sound like somebody else, man. We're not talking just about the solutions. We're not holding ourselves accountable. So let me be clear about this. And then I'm sorry about that, Russell, but I could do this on Facebook, and we could just go somewhere else. If somebody says something that I know I need to be talking about, or I feel, it's a dialogue. We're not individually. It's kind of confusing for me. But I wanted to say this. If you paid attention to my Facebook, I've been at the commissioner when I hear him say things that I don't like, and it don't matter who it is, because I look at it like, hey, you didn't come get me out of prison, so I'm going to make it the rest of the life. I made it that far without you. Otherwise, we're going to join or not. But what I do understand, I go hard at him, but I wanted to just identify something, right? And I can't believe I'm probably saying it, but I looked at it and I thought about the picture, and I was more than angry. I didn't even get on Facebook about him with that for one reason. I thought about it and I said to myself, well, what's wrong with black folks, man? When don't we understand if we put somebody in position? If I see you in position and you got to go talk to the Ku Klux Klan, it's on me putting you in that position to say I got confidence that Mike can handle that. So if you put him in that position, you better have confidence he can handle that. And if you didn't have confidence he could handle that, then you shouldn't have put him in the position. You understand? None of this stuff makes sense to me. You understand? And also, let me say, when the minister, and me and the minister, I love the minister. You understand? I've been with the nation for the longest. I ain't changed my name because of my mama's name, but I love the nation, right? But I wanted to say one thing, Minister. We can call out for land, some of the things, and that's been called, and we know everything is possible, right? Yeah. But what we don't do actions that make sense. Like Adidas. I wear Adidas. We don't take every picture of Adidas, of brothers in Boston, and say, here go all of our people that died in your Adidas wear. Adidas contributes some money to us. We need some help. We ain't going to nobody about nothing that we should be, right? And we won't, and I haven't seen one of our black leaders yet get up and say, I learned this from prison. We could riot in there. We could tear up stuff. We could jump on cops. We could do everything. Anytime I organize, don't go to that canteen, that drove them crazy. We should tell our people, don't spend no money until they do right, because all they care about is money. That's a calling.
I need to give you credit for something that I don't think people talk about enough. Is I always say that there's many Malcolms and Dr. Kings and all the other names, Diane Nash, go down the list, in places that nobody knows about. One of the things I was impressed with you about, and there's others that I could name, you were activists in prison. Right. You were organizing in prison. You were getting the backlash of correctional officers in prison. Brutal.
Bro,
brutal
reaction. You know, a lot of them don't know just to say. So Minister Randy know, Dickinson know. The whole jail could be out, and they kept working with everybody, and they would put me in the hole. They took me for 3 days naked and kept me in the basement of the jail. You understand that? Nobody addressed that. I didn't sit in there. I did just what Malcolm said. He said prison could be two things, prison or second to college. I used it as second to college. It's insulting to me to come home and give all those years and nobody want to apply what I know that I lived. Come and get that knowledge and then use it from me and let my life mean something. Come and find out. Bring me to the police station, and instead of saying they don't know, bring an innocent man in that police station to talk to your officers about making that mistake of putting the wrong person away.
How about I make that commitment?
My idea it is.
There you go.
Representative, I know.
I'll be there.
As we make a shift over the next 30 minutes, which I want to get to Paul and Glenn, because there's some brothers here that I know have been talking about solutions for a long time, like Paul and Maurice Coleman from Bank of America. I want to get to you first about what's happening legislatively and what's there. Can you just talk about that?
Sure. So I can just tell you I could actually talk for the next 30 minutes.
Yeah, don't
because,
do that.
Because there's been so much richness in this room that needs to be addressed, and a lot of it, some of it, directed towards electeds. I'm going to begin by saying what Gloria used to say, Gloria Fox, to one of the comments. And that is, Gloria used to say about people running and thinking they can do so much better than all the folks who are elected, and let's kick them out because they're not doing anything. She used to say, look, we don't need different Negroes. What we need are more Negroes. So the problem at the State House is the same problem that you have at every other one of these institutions we've talked about today. There's simply not enough of us. Our place is no different. So when I hear the sheriff talk about arrogance and racism, when I hear the commissioner talk about the challenges he's had with favoritism and racism, we are all going through the exact same environment. I'm gonna give you one example and I'll give you what I mean. So you had asked to have a story about police. I have many, and so I'm gonna defer because we've heard many. I'm gonna give you a story about right now what the caucus is dealing with, about racism. And so it offends me to sit every time in a room and suffer a fool lightly. I don't do that. And so folks don't like that I go right to the point. I don't want to deal with your white foolishness. And so I don't allow you to sit here and talk to me foolishly. And so recently, the caucus, we had to have a meeting about something. And there was a person who wanted to sit there through our hour and a half with 10 of us. There are only 14 of us. If you get 10 of us together, we are serious about this issue. But through this hour and a half discussion, you want to keep telling me how many black friends you have. And how you have grown up with black people. And all of the things that happen about your blackness. And so our chair, on multiple occasions, tried to cut this person off, and they still, because of their white privilege, don't understand that we're trying to tell you, shut up. This isn't what we want to hear. And so I'm going to begin to just say, when we begin this conversation, the sheriff, all the elected of color in Boston, all the elected across this Commonwealth, we begin by simply saying, it is now time to listen to black people. And all of the things that you've seen, there are 10 ideas for at the federal level that Ayanna put together that she thought was most important to have the Congressional Black Caucus move. We have 4 here at the state level that we believe in the Massachusetts Black and Latino Caucus are most important for us to do at this moment. And then 2 at the city level. We believe that this is going to happen in phases. There are some things we say now, absolutely at this point. July 31st, we want it done. And then there are some things we're going to come back to you on, a lot of these broad issues that people have talked about today. And so of the 4 that are here in what we believe in the Commonwealth, is 3 of them we've already pretty much got commitments from, as you said, the Speaker, the Senate President, and the Governor, Post being one of them. So police officers and standards and training, when you say the governor put that out, let me just make sure you understand. Gov don't move on that unless I, the caucus, have put him in a room quarterly and said, this is the issue that is most important. So yeah, we have been working on that quite some time. Police officer standards and training was a bill that had languished for years. I had filed that bill session after session after session.
And certification was
And certification. So just know that we thought it was going to probably languish again this year until the Gov said, yes, he can try to do it administratively. Because as you know, I don't suffer fools lightly. The Speaker is the exact same for me. I don't want his foolishness as well, so he don't have, we don't have a good relationship. But at this moment, folks have seen, Tito and I have talked about this just recently. They always thought I was the angriest black man they knew. They then saw us on the street and saw that we can get angrier. And decided, okay, well, those bills, Rep. Holmes, you've been working on, we might want to talk to you again. And so there are 3 of them, but the last one is Fuquan's bill. There's the 4th one they are most frightened of. Fuquan is Wiki Green McGee at the AACC. So when you hear we don't go to prisons, I go to prisons. I'm at prisons often. I teach in prisons. I'm there, I land. I see all these guys in prisons. That's where I see them. He has a bill that says, look, to a lot of the points you talked about today, there's a reason why lots of us are in prison. It is because of structural racism. Let me tell you what I mean by he has a bill. the AACC, the group that he's managing and now someone else is now managing, they wrote the bill. They said, we're not here because of something that's just in the judicial system. It was education, it was judicial, it was all of the poverty and things that we had. We want to have a commission to study why we're here. Get into structural racism around why we ended up in this DOC. Folks are frightened of it because what does it lead to? It probably leads to the word reparations, right? And so when you're singing, when I'm sitting, the meeting we're talking about, and I'll end here with the person I'm talking about, they did not want to even discuss this bill because they didn't want to discuss it because they had already put it into study. It offends me that white women get together and they are one of the greatest benefactors of our fight. The greatest. What do I mean? We have fought for diversity. We have fought for more inclusion. We have fought to make sure we're there. And then the moment you turn around, your diversity becomes, here's the diversity. This white woman, I've literally had people tell me, when we're having a discussion around diversity, they say, we're very diverse. And I say, okay, tell me what you mean. Here's a LGBT person, here's a woman, she's white. And I say, everyone you just listed is white. Everyone you just listed is white. This person did not want to talk about putting it into study because of the fact that she didn't want to have a reason. She didn't want to admit that she actually put a structural racism bill in study. At this moment, you now have to have that lens put on you. And so I can tell you, I'm asking this room, and I'm going to ask this room, please, everybody in this room, of the 4 things that we have commitments on all of them. There's only one that's still outstanding, and it's the Fuquan bill. And what I mean by Fuquan's bill, literally the AACC wrote it. I didn't amend, change a paragraph, change a word. Gave it to House Counsel, file this bill. This is what the inmates want me to file. I have not changed it. And so I'm just asking everybody in the room and everybody online, push everything you can towards Claire Cronin, who's chair of judiciary, who's starting to write and craft what we believe is an omnibus bill larger than what the governor and I and all the caucus proposed the other day, because structural racism should be a part of this reform now, not something we talk about later. Thank you.
So I want to do this because we run out of
Where
time. I
can
want to
we,
go to Paul
read more
first.
about it?
I mean,
I'll
Tito,
text it out or
Glenn,
I'll give it to you right now.
And then Mo, and then I'm going to work my back. I'm going to give you, Reverend Dickinson, really to close us out. So I'm going to give you some good time at the end. Let me start with Paul. And Marv, I got you.
Thank you for having me, brothers. Everything I'm hearing today, it's about the lack of power, the lack of access, the lack of equity in all of our institutions, corporate, government, you name it. There need to be more representative. Holmes, Johnsons, Carters, you name it, senators. But that's not going to happen until we realize where the real power is, right? Is economic influence. To your point, it didn't have to take you 32 years in jail to learn that a boycott, a good old boycott, will hurt people in the pockets. So we need to figure out what it is at this moment that we all can come together. There are conversations that happen that are really encouraging amongst many people around the power that we have, the influence that we have, and the little bit of it that we have, that we can then move things forward together, right? And we can play our different lanes, we can continue to sort of have different views, but it's not going to happen until we come together and figure out how we play chess, right? How do we become Machiavellian, just like we have been a part of these institutions for so long, and drive change. And we need to drive in our own lanes, whether it's me in corporate, whether it's foundations, whether it's government, but we need more of us, right? It can't just be a few of us, it can't just be the one. And so what we need to figure out is how do we hold our leaders accountable, our institutions, right? And how do we get more of us there? Because again, the fight is only going to be as good as how many of us are participating in it and united in that front in it. So I'm telling you right now, there is a beautiful thing happening right now. The first time in my 20-year career, there are a number of us in corporate coming together to do something. First time in my 20-year career, we all know each other individually, right? But it's the first time that we said to each other, okay, you know this person, you work here, you work there, what are you going to do to change? And how, by the way, how are we going to lead? How are we going to lead? How is it going to be a visible black leadership moment, right, where we all dictate what is going to happen with our institutions, with our not-for-profits, with our black-led not-for-profits, by the way, which are the ones that don't get the funding that they need. The philanthropic dollars never get down to them, less than 2% of them. Yeah. So how do we support the Amaris, the Glens, and all the other leaders out there that are doing the Shaguns that are doing the work? And so that's what I'm really focused on: strategic, economic development, opportunities, access.
Thank you, Paul. I want to go to you, Tito, then Glenn, and then my friend, Maurice.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for bringing all of these great minds together. I'm honored to be in this room. One of the first things that we have to do is help each other. And I just want to publicly thank Amari Parrish Jeffries. When I lost the election, I didn't have a job. And I found out something very real, which is, as elected officials, you don't get unemployment. And so Amari was actually in a role, and he gave me a contract. The reason why I still have a house, the reason why I'm able to be here today. And he saw me put myself out, and understand, Boston is one of 2 cities in the United States of America that has not had a mayor of color. These are cities over 500,000. It's only us and Indianapolis. And so we always think money, power, respect. What I realized very quickly by getting into the political sphere, it's about power. It's absolutely about power and understand, some people consider Russell Holmes a very conservative person. Russell Holmes is the reason why, and in any situation when they're dealing with black folk in the State House, if he's in it or not, they're like, hey, what's Russell gonna do? That is the reason why things are moved at the State House. I was considered an angry black man in city council. Many people might, I wear some pastel shirts and stuff like that. Many people might think of me in a different way, but I will say to you, some of the hardest fights that I had to fight was, I put forward a Black Men's Commission in 2014 in the city of Boston. We had 700 black men testify on that commission. When we moved it forward, we had a unanimous vote. The city councilor from South Boston backed us. The city councilor from the Italian section of the city and downtown backed us. It was unanimous, but it got vetoed, right? And so what we're dealing with, well, there's some sisters here, is we have a $3.6 billion budget at the city level. We have to, as noted, we have to make sure that this moment doesn't pass and we turn this into a movement. We have to step forward and, one, have these conversations, and Michael likes to call them, the front porch conversations. I'm glad that we let y'all into the barbershop, those who are here, but we have to step forward on that tip. And I absolutely believe these aspects around economics are critical. Over $600 million is spent on discretionary funds in the city of Boston, and less than 1% of it go to businesses owned by people of color. My father died in 2002. Mm-hmm. He did this work every single day. That number's the same. Mm-hmm. And so it's up to us, and I'm in the cannabis industry right now. Less than 1% of cannabis businesses in the United States of America are owned by black people. We have to step up and turn this moment into a movement. We have to step up and have our backs. I didn't agree with Commissioner Gross on this. But I didn't say anything publicly because we haven't talked personally. And the one rule that I have, and I might blast him on Facebook after it, but the one rule that I have is I'm gonna have that conversation with him personally, because this is the thing I learned also about our white friends. They meet all of the time, and they don't have to like each other and agree with each other on everything to do anything together, and that's what we have to do.
Thank you, Tito.
Because hardly anybody called me
I want to go to Glenn because I really want to get a few more brothers in and Marvin in the back. So Glenn, you know, just for introduction, because you've been in this space talking about economic empowerment, really building that money matters. You've been doing that since the Million Man March. I remember coming back from the Million Man March, and we were in the Boston Community Information Center with Siddiqui, sitting there with Diane Wilkerson, the late Nada Skia, Senator Wilkerson. It was everybody that we had grown up watching do this movement, Chuck Turner. And you were talking about this back then, about the power of money and how we take the power. And I wanted to lift you up, Glenn, because now is the time to have those conversations because people are paying attention. And then I want to get Mo as well.
Thanks, Michael. And let me just try to make it plain because I could spend a lot of time on this topic. But I think, let me start with a saying that I believe in, which is follow the money. But I want to add something to it. It's like understand the money, how it works, right? And so my personal experience is, you know, one of the, I guess, larger business owners in this community, but it's small, right? Over the last 20 years, we've been able to put close to $500 million back in the pockets of our employees, which are mostly black and brown people, right? So we need more of that, to your point, and we try to do Corey and all that stuff, but we could do better. So I want to start with the arc of economic history just very briefly, because for me, when I listen to this conversation, I think this issue around white supremacy is really, to use your word, it's a rationalization, a protection of the business. It's just business. It's always been about business, right? And when you look at business, either individually or industry-wise, and you have free labor as part of your line item that doesn't exist, it's amazing what happens from generation to generation to generation. So I think we just need to pause on that, because one thing that I learned fairly recently was, and I was kind of in shock around this, is it wasn't just slavery, but then it was that transition into conflict leasing around, you're talking about the judicial system in the economic piece. That was a pipeline of free labor. And we look at industrial steel, we look at the railroads, and we look at coal, we look at timber, we look at what built the South per se. It was, again, it was free labor. And what's happening is there's a disproportionate accumulation happening at that time. We all know that, right? So as we are not accumulating anything, in essence, some of us are, we know what's happening with what I call the white elite, because then the poor white folks are in the same system, right? Just don't know it, and that's where white supremacy also helps make that continuous. So that's my first piece. I think from a solutions point of view, I think there's two ways of kind of making money today, and there's other ways, but really it's a job, right? So how do we make sure that we get good paying jobs, and then we're smart with our money, right? So how do we make sure that we're investing and so on and so forth, and we're building equity through that component. And the other one is, you know, the whole entrepreneurial thing is how do we build our own businesses, right? And so my final comments around that is, you know, is we won, and it's hard to build businesses. And I was talking to my brother Tito earlier, and part of it is if you don't have money, if we don't have strong balance sheets, it's doubly hard. And so what we need to talk about amongst ourselves, and some of our folks have been behind the scenes quietly, but also working tightly, is how do we make sure we level the playing field on the capital side and the credit side? Because to me, that's that next stage of reconstruction, right? We didn't get the land, they took it back from us, right? Within 6 months or so and so forth. But really now it's how do we get capital and credit out to our brown brothers and sisters who are trying to build businesses? And there's a whole dissertation on how we do that, but there's folks working quietly to make that, we can make that happen, taking advantage of the moment right now. And there's all other things that can also be supporting these businesses, which I'll pause on, but I'll end with a little personal story, which is, a couple of years back, my dad turned 80, and he had bought 10 acres of land up in New Hampshire, right? And you got to maintain the land, right? It costs to hold the land. And he's like, well, you know, I'm thinking about moving this to you and your brother. And my brother's like, I don't know. And I said, hold up, that land is not going to lead the family, right? And so what we've been able to do in the last year or so is convert it over to a group of family folks that we trust and know, brown folks, to own this land. And we want to convert that back to a farm, right? Get back to the basics, because I think we need to be disruptive, because at the end of the day, we've been forced into, and we are inheriting a system that doesn't make a lot of sense. You know what I'm saying? It's extractive. It's soul-sucking. And so we're beautiful people, right? So how do we rethink, reimagine what the future can be, not based on what they've kind of pretty much, you know, we've been kind of forced to inherit. And I'll end with this last piece, and I brought up my company earlier. I'm proud to say, and again, we do this quietly, that we just got rid of our last investors, and now we have the ability to really broaden ownership. So we're now going to be having the folks that built our company own our company, because we don't want to borrow the system where only a few of us are really benefiting at this disproportionate level. No, we need to spread the wealth, because that's how we treat each other. So I just want to I'll end with that.
So I have to take the moment to just lift up the name of Kenneth Guscott, who was a mentor of mine. For people who don't know, who are online, Kenneth Guscott was the president of the NAACP from 1963 to 1968, some of the most turbulent years in Boston. He recruited Miss Charlotte Nelson and all these bad activists from across the country. And when I told him I wanted to be NAACP president, he said, I got you. And set up his office as my campaign office at NAACP, but he talked about economics all the time, Glenn. He hammered that home in every volunteer that was in that office. So thank you for that. Mo, I'm gonna say, so people, I'm coming to Dwayne too. For Mo, I've known Mo a long time. Used to live here, left, came back. You're a beast in corporate America. For those who don't know, Maurice Coleman. And then you really created the energy behind organizations like the NAACP, right? I remember Miss Dukes, Mama Dukes in New York called me and said, do you know Maurice Coleman? I said, yeah, that's my man. Well, he just put money into our New York NAACP and the national NAACP so you can get some work done. So I just wanted you to talk about all these issues you heard and really the role of corporate America and the work that you've been able to do.
So first of all, brothers, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be back home. Boston is my second home. Just put some notes down that I want to touch on. Appreciative of the courageous conversation. I hope we can graduate to courageous action.
Yeah.
I hope that we can move through these 3 stages. Awareness is number 1. We see a lot of people who are aware. Some shocked, they shouldn't be. We could go back to Amadou Diallo. I'm a New Yorker, New Jersey guy. I remember when that happened, and Yusef Hawkins, and we could go down the list. Michael Griffin, this isn't new. Awareness is happening for people. I get it, that's great. But how do we graduate from awareness to action to accountability? Those are 3 stages: awareness, action, and accountability. How do we use what's in our own hand? Yes, I'm a senior leader in corporate America, but the reality of the situation is none of us should be allowing our job description to become our self-description. That's one of the biggest issues that we have. So one of the things that I've tried to do was lean in with my skill set to try to rebuild the communities that I came from. Brother Muhammad talked about that we should have our own separate state. That's great. I believe in that, but let's start with owning our own community. All of us should have an investment in our own community. All of us should be owners in our own community. We should be contributors of the 3 T's: time, talent, and treasure in our own community. The reality of the situation is I just moved back up to Boston from New Jersey, New York. It was interesting to see when I redid, you guys have sold homes, I'm sure, when I redid our landscaping and our carpentry and our electrical work, everybody that I hired looked like everybody in this room. Here's the other piece. All of them were guys that I grew up with who spent time behind the wall. Yeah. There was a situation where people called the police to make sure we had the exact permits because they saw the construction that was done. After it was done, we sold that property for the most value on that block. So we built the equity of others on that block, and I was able to put capital in the hands of guys that I grew up with. The imperative thing here is to use what you have in your hand. So I take my knowledge and my skill set and I go to the Tully House in Newark, New Jersey. I talk to a bunch of friends that I know who are still behind the wall. Because I grew up where guys got arrested for pharmaceutical distribution. The reality of the situation is it was the 80s. Either Biggie got it right, and I'm a Brooklyn guy too. Either you slang rock or you had a jump shot. I had a wicked jump shot. The reality of the situation is many of us were on the bubble of Penn State or the state pen. Many of us was on the bubble of Yale or jail. But we have to lean in and we have to think about how do we create skills, because when people come home, they're not going to corporate America. So I'm working with one of my guys to ban the box, because you got to check a box still. If you come home, you have to check a box. So how do we get legislation there to work through that? How do we get people thinking about technology? How do we make sure that in our sphere of influence, when we see construction going on in our community, people will say, well, they're not trained, they're not the right trades, they don't have the certification. Demolition? Demolition. Excavation. We can't move dirt. We can't knock something down. That's basic. So we can move into that particular arena because that's action. That's us instilling the ability for us to know. The last piece I'll touch on is financial empowerment. I don't call it literacy. Like Michael, I grew up in housing projects, Marcy, Dolly Homes, go down the list. My mama raised 5 kids off $30,000 a year. If you could do that, you were more than financially literate. You just need to be a little bit more empowered because you know how to rob Peter to pay Paul. You've been doing that your whole life. So we have to use what we know to teach people about cash flow, to teach people not to keep it 100. I tell young boys all the time, you keep it at 100, what's that gonna get you? Keep it 700. Your credit score needs to be 700. If you keep it 700, then I can get you access to capital. So we have to change our language. We have to use what we have in our hand. That came from Adam Clayton Powell. Use what you got. I challenge everybody in this room to think about your awareness, think about your action, think about your accountability. And the accountability is I'm able to look at guys that I work with. My man, Emory Jones, many of you know him. Jay-Z talks about him all the time. I grew up with those guys. Emory is now running his own fashion company, putting people to work in West Baltimore. Stan Tucker, behind the wall for 10 years, had to open up his own company, Job One, with his wife. He couldn't get access to the capital, but his wife could. So we structured an LLC to support her and got him a line of credit. Now he employs 30 people who were formerly incarcerated. You got power. Yeah. You just can't wait for somebody else to tell you you got it. The same way you shouldn't wait for somebody to tell you to invest in your community. Last story. When I bought my first brownstone in Harlem, I bought it for $15,000. I went to my father. My father has an 8th grade education, smartest man I know. I said, Dad, what do you think about me buying this building? He said, where is it? I said, Harlem. He said, Harlem's part of Manhattan, that's an island. I said, Dad, you already know that. He's like, but that's my point, it's land, they ain't making no more of it. Go ahead and buy. So I tried to go into a couple of friends. You know, I went to one of them fancy Ivy League schools. So I went to one of my friends. I said, man, you need to get in on this with me. You know how we do. We was living downtown, Wall Street job. One of my friends said, man, they don't have amenities over there. I said, amenities? You just learned that word last week. What you talking? How we get fancy? How we do that? Dorchester, Harlem, Brooklyn, Trenton, Camden. Don't isolate yourself. Yeah. Your problems are universal to our communities throughout the country. No one that Mike Curry has up there is exclusively from one neighborhood. Mm-hmm. We have a national crisis that we can all play a role in solving. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you, Mo. So Mo, thank you. You know, we've been friends a long time, man, so I'm glad you were here. Dwayne Jackson, another, you know, we talk about the business community, the legends in our black business leadership in this city, in this state, and in this country, and Dwayne Jackson is a good friend of mine. I'm glad that he's here, and I want to go to him, and I want to ask if we can go to Brother Dwayne, Marvin, and I'm going to let Reverend Dickerson close it out.
I'm going to stop you right there. Let me say this last piece. I would not be me but for this man right here. Be clear about it. One of the things that you can do in your power right now is mentor and sponsor.
Yes.
17 years ago, I turned to this man right here and said, big bro, what should I do? He kicked me out of his car and said, you go do what you're supposed to do and what I taught you to do. Because I've given you the knowledge, the skill set, and I got your back. Mm-hmm. If you're not sponsoring and mentoring somebody in your neighborhood, you're not working. Thank you, bro.
Thank you. Go ahead, Drew.
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael. And I think it's important for everyone in this room to understand that this is a historical moment. This September will represent 50 years in this city, which I've never called home. I'm a native New Yorker, grew up in Brooklyn, moved to Queens at 14. I am experiencing deja vu from the riots of '64 in Harlem and in Brooklyn that migrated to Rochester after the killing of a black kid by a white officer in New York. I came home, I've been living remotely because of COVID, and I was in Boston that day to check on my office, and I went back where I'm living. My wife and I had dinner. We went upstairs to look at the news, and I was watching the looting at Copley, and it was like this moment of deja vu, like, are we really here again? Let me say something, and I'll tell you about strategy and power and economics, but the thing that's most important to me right now is to understand that this moment has been experienced before, I've lived through this moment of disruption. It was called the long, hot summer. It ended in '68 when Martin Luther King was murdered. There was an onslaught of white society providing access to institutions and capital investment in communities. I am a product of that. 1971, I came here to go to MIT. I completed 2 degrees. I decided that, you know what, I'm not going to get a fair shake in this town in particular at that moment in time, and I started my own business. 1981, December 11th, 1981 was the last time I accepted a check from an employer. I've been eating what I kill ever since then. Because everybody can do it. So here's the deal. I've been blessed with having access to the rooms and experiencing the mentorship of probably some of the most brilliant real estate minds in this city and in this region. I had the fortune of being nominated to the board of Massport, served as the vice chair, and was the chair of the Real Estate and Strategic Initiatives Committee, which was probably, arguably, the most powerful committee at that board at the time, with a monthly meeting, whereas all of the others were quarterly. Massport is a $600 million operating budget and has a $7 billion impact on the local regional economy. What I saw was the power of a public agency that had potential economic influence throughout the region, and particularly in our community. So, long story short, at the time I was advising FAMU, Florida A&M University, on a major capital project they were involved in. I was flying back and forth to Tallahassee. I realized that I was a customer, constituent, if you will, of the agency. And I said, you know what, this is really strange, because we ain't there. Contracts weren't going to us. Long story short, you hear about the Massport model. It was my design. I said, look here, we got, I don't know how large our portfolio was, but I was pushing for more disposition of our real estate assets because this is a hard market to get into. They call it high barrier to entry market. And therefore, there's a ton of money, both locally, nationally, and internationally, trying to get into Boston. I said, you know what, we have a moment. I have a moment here. And so I said, if we're going to have dispositions here at this public agency, we need to have black folks as part of the owners, professional services being rendered by companies doing these deals, and ensure that employees and or other forms of compensation are required on every deal. I will say, and this is sort of it's a moment, and I will tell you, I've never experienced anyone like this in my entire life. Tom Glenn, who was the CEO at the time, he and I saw our roles as aligned. He has an extraordinary social consciousness, and we said, we're going to do some amazing things at this agency. He took that ball and ran with it. The point of that is that all I did was spoke. The second thing was leadership. And the alignment of your voice with a person in power changes the paradigm. And that's what this is about. So I want to say thank you, because I've never seen this before. 50 years, this is the first time I have seen the spectrum of personalities and people and incomes and education and life experience. I want to tell you, I just saw you on TV the other night, and it's an honor to meet you, man. Wow. I think I hope we have more conversations about this, because the idea of penetrating these markets and affecting institutional and structural change, which is what this is really all about, takes a lot more thought, a lot more analysis. And to respond to the brother who said, what are we going to do? We got to do some work, and it's got to be thoughtful. That's it.
Thank you, Dwayne. So they've given us a few more minutes, so I want to close it out with two more people. A good friend of mine, Marv, and I want to just acknowledge in this city, you got activist families who make huge differences. The Mel King and his family and the work that they do in this city, the Janey family. I can go down the list of families that I've grown up watching, the Abdulhalik family with Nubian Notion. But one is Brother Marvin Jones and his mom, which is one of the baddest activists in the city, because she's in every meeting I've ever been in, right? Whether it's construction, what they're gonna do to parcel, a march, a protest. So I wanted to, but between what Marvin does and his mom does and the rest of the family, give a chance for Marvin to bring us home too, as well as Reverend Dickerson.
So, it's good to see everybody. Something about my mom, when I was, I believe about 5, I grew up on Mission Hill. There were only 3 black families when I grew up on Mission Hill in the 60s. Back then, the Black Panther Party was very active. My mother put myself and my oldest sister in the Black Liberation Schools, so that we had the growing up in a white neighborhood and being around racists, that we had the mental capacity to handle and know what we were going through. So I give my mom props for that. And that's been instilled throughout our years. But what I can say is, looking at all these pictures up here, and nobody's touched on it, is that as black people, and looking at these young men and women up here, that we are at war, or people are at war with us. These individuals on stage, I won't say murdered, they were assassinated. And as black people, if we do not, from the beginning, understand the perspective and handle things right off the gate, understanding that people are at war with us, and handle things accordingly, then we're lost. As my father says, the ship has left the port, and we haven't even packed our bags. So we have to get to a point, whether it's forming new businesses where brothers like you are coming out of jail, and you should be able to go to black and brown brothers that have jobs or businesses that can hire you. You should not have to wonder what's going to happen. It is our responsibility as black men and women to handle ourselves. So I'm going to say self-determination. We have to do the hard work. This is not hard work. When we see white people walking through state capitals with guns, when we see police that are murdering us, when I saw George Floyd getting murdered or assassinated, the immediate thought that I had was, if I were standing there watching that, first of all, I wouldn't be watching it. I would have jumped in. So if you don't, from the beginning, if you are a man that is not willing to die for brothers and sisters that look like you are lost. And I'm gonna be honest. We fight wars every day. We fight wars when we leave home. I mean, we're thinking about, what do we tell our kids? I mean, I told my sons, look, you might be shot by police. There are plenty of great police officers. But now it's individuals. You have a president that is blowing the dog whistle, and all the ignorant racists and white supremacists are out. When I came into Boston in the city about 3 weeks ago, what do I see? Military police on the streets protecting infrastructure for white businesses. So there's something going on, and it doesn't include us. We need to wake up, we need to man up, and in some cases we need to ante up. We should all have weapons. We should all start businesses. There's so much I could talk about, but we have to do better. We have to mentor our kids, and I have to give it up to the NAACP teaching the leaders of the future, because that's what's needed. We need to change policy. We need to vote. If we don't vote, we can't have the DAs that are in office that are now helping some of these families get justice. So again, brothers, I love all of you. I love my sisters. We need to stand up. We need to understand that people are at war with us. We need to handle ourselves accordingly.
Thank you, Marvin. Before I go to Reverend Dickerson to close this, I want to. What's that? Oh, 5. Before I go there, I want to ask a question, just a little survey. How many people have a gun license? You can put your hands down. Of those who don't have a gun license, how many are thinking about going to get a gun license? Reverend Dickerson, again, thankful that Reverend Dickerson's here. Reverend Dickerson, you have the remaining time, and we have to be out of here in really 4 minutes. 4 minutes. But you got to speak into that mic because it's being recorded.
All right, now listen, I'm going to take 1 minute and give you 3 minutes so you give us some takeaways, okay? We need to lift each other up. And we're harder on each other than we are other folk. And that's why we're so hard on our commissioner. If he was white, we wouldn't be as hard on him. That's just a fact. There's a lot of brothers in this room, we don't even speak to one another, all right? I'm in all kinds of settings, and I know how to converse with all types of people. I have a little education. So that's nothing when you're not willing to help your own people, all right? Brother Darrell mentioned something, I want to holler at him later. He said his contract is up this month. Right. So somebody's got to put in that call, and I don't mind putting in that call if you need that support. Brother Tito mentioned about the commission. He started, he talked, I was one of the brothers that came to the City Hall, a commission on black males. I'm sick and tired. Every time we talking about handling black men, it morphs to something else. Men of color, black and brown. Who call themselves brown? So we got to deal with black men. We're the so-called threat. We've been demonized. So we got to deal with us. There's nothing wrong with dealing with us. Some of y'all got uncomfortable when Brother Randy, Minister Randy, said what he said about separation and reparations. Some people got their degrees, they got their job, their house, their car, they're fine. So we talk to them, black brothers, about reparations, they laugh. Oh, you really? Come on, pal. Yeah, you know, so I'll shut up. I'm not finished, but I'll just shut up because I want some takeaways. Brother Mike, I do commend you for being here and bringing us all together. And as others have said,
thank you.
This is a beautiful thing to have such strong and diverse minds. Because see, when they talk about diversity in Boston, they don't have to include black men. Yeah. They don't. They just include one black woman, a white woman, you know, a gay guy, you know, and they ain't talking about black men. See, y'all can't say amen. Let me get this mic up.
So we got it. Okay. Thank you. Give me a hand. Round of applause for all of you, actually. So we're going to close it out, but I'd say this. One is we need everybody to come to the stage. I know we did a group photo out there. I'd like us to take a photo with these pictures before we leave here. Two, that this is, I just did this because I felt like the barbershop was closed, it was said, and I felt like we needed to get together and have a conversation. I'm hoping that all of you feel like this was necessary and there'll be other conversations, right? I do say this, to your point, Reverend Dickerson, it's about relationships. I don't agree with a lot of you in this room all the time, but I can call Rasan and we can go at it. We can discuss things. You and I have a conversation. Commissioner Gross calls me every time there's something in the news. I could text him and say, hey, what's going on with that? We can disagree and still talk and still have a relationship. That's the purpose of all of this. Just in case you didn't get, that was the end game. That ultimately we got to be able to get together, talk, use each other's powers of influence with Mo and Bank of America and Paul at State Street. This is our time. But they got to hear from you. You got to be able to work together. So I would say this, just thank you first and foremost for coming. I want to give a round of applause for the people who sponsored this. Trina from BMC, Manny, Fidelity, the Boston Foundation, and others. We just want to say WGBH. Thank the Black Camera Crew, which was dope, for being here. And last but not least, let's thank RCC and President Roberson for having us as well. So thank you. This is going to be edited, put in a video, and then shown, broadcast. So thank you. Let's take a picture up front with the mask on.